Chapter 385. Usually, the astrology ceremony would be located on the top floor of the wizard's pagoda, standing on the top floor of the Tower of Destiny and looking out into the distance. There would be no visual obstruction at all. That was because the walls of the tower would become completely transparent after the astrology ceremony began. Whenever night fell and the stars shone brightly, the place would seem exceptionally quiet and profound, as if the stargazer was embedded into the endless starry sky. There were no magical facilities or stargazing tools in the vast space of nearly 1,000 square meters. There were only complicated and precise rune lines, magic power hubs, and star symbols densely covering the walls, floor, and sky of the huge space. In the eyes of many quack prophets, astrology had always been the most accurate and effective wizard spell among all kinds of divination spells. However, because the astrology ceremony required the cooperation of the astrology platform and a set of fixed astrology procedures, the consumption of resources was relatively large. Therefore, unless it was necessary, no one was willing to use the astrology ceremony. Instead, they preferred simpler methods, such as tortoise shells and tarot cards. In general, astrology was more similar to drawing a map of the long river of fate. Although it was only a short section, there were no omissions and no confusion. It could tell the prophet where the potential was, where the problem was, and the general path to the future. But how to choose, the prophet had to make a wise decision. Methods such as tarot cards could only help the prophet to peek at a certain scene or scene in the future, allowing him to understand the good or bad luck of a certain moment. Due to the lack of the cause and subsequent changes of the matter, it was easy to misinterpret the future and go the opposite way of fate. Therefore, in order to have a more comprehensive understanding of everything that happened in the Dark Witch camp, and to avoid her rash actions affecting grandmother Ender, Alice naturally chose astrology. After a quarter of an hour, Alice, who had already taken a bath and changed her clothes, walked into the astrology platform with bursts of fragrant wind. Alice silently stood under the circular dome, which was also the core of the huge and complicated wizard spell on the floor. As she clasped her palms together in front of her chest, the mysterious spell formation with her at the center immediately emitted an azure light that quickly infected the entire hall. To clear her mind, Alice first completed a short meditation, embedding her mind into the deep and vast starry sky. In the distant sky, a few of the brightest main stars suddenly flickered and sent back traces of responses. Thin but pure star power passed through the almost non-existent dome and slowly entered her body. The magic circle under Alice's feet slowly rose, and the blue light almost turned the whole astrology hall into a huge sapphire. And Alice was immersed in this blue ocean, borrowing the power of the Stag constellation's main star. Her thoughts followed the guidance of the power of the blood meridians in her body and extended endlessly to a place in the distant horizon. It was as if her soul had suddenly broken free from the shackles of her physical body. Alice felt so relaxed and unrestrained at this moment. Her soul was suddenly free from all restraints, and she was wrapped up by the power of the stars. Following the guidance of the power of her bloodline, she blankly crossed the endless sea of stars and suddenly arrived at a mysterious place, Neo Valley, east of the Kali River, near Mount Relion. In a secluded valley surrounded by mountains, a tall black sorcerer tower stood silently. In the entire sorcerer continent, this was the only pure black sorcerer tower. Even though its appearance was not special, it was eerily floating in a layer of blurry shadows. Even on a clear day, standing in the valley, one would only see the tower in black and white, and its shape was distorted and strange. It was as if this black tower did not stand in the wizard world, but was a projection left here by an unknown tower in the shadow plane. As for the creatures and plants in the valley, they were even more gray and lifeless. You could not see any vivid colors of life on them, only black and white, and the overwhelming gray shadows. And this was the Dark Witch's Tower of Origin, the Black Secret Realm. Alice's mind was wrapped up by the power of the stars, and like a meteor, She crashed into the black secret realm and suddenly appeared in a prison on the third underground level of the wizard's pagoda. Although it was called a prison, it was actually a stone room about 3 square meters in size. Countless chains covered in runes passed through the walls, firmly locking a hunchbacked old witch in the middle of the stone room. A dim old oil lamp was placed on a wooden shelf on the stone wall covered in moss. Not only did the weak flame the size of a soybean not illuminate the stone room, but also filled the room with flickering shadows. In this strange dark tower, be it the glow of the runes or the color of the flames, they were all gray, a gray so dense that it made one's heart palpitate. Alice opened her eyes and looked at this gray world. She looked at the familiar figure who was locked in place. She could not help but reach out her trembling hands to hold poison centipede into her skinny face. The rage in her heart could not be suppressed. Perhaps it had sensed the abnormal ripples that should not have appeared here. The oil lamp on the wooden shelf on the stone wall suddenly burst into sparks. In the next second, 2 strange black shadows emerged from the shadows of the stone room. The black shadows wriggled, and the smoke-like dark matter pieced together to form the appearance of 2 shadow witches. Their entire bodies were hidden in the thick darkness, and they could only roughly distinguish their outlines through the slight color difference. Their faces seemed to be covered with a thick layer of black gauze, blurry, and it was impossible to see their faces clearly. What's going on? The leading dark witch carefully examined the entire stone room, but did not find anything unusual. Why would there suddenly be a strange soul aura here? Did someone really sneak in just now? I think you're just being paranoid. Another dark witch said indifferently, maybe something happened in the Shadow Kingdom, and that's why we're here. Now is the time when the Dark Pocket Realm and the Shadow Kingdom overlap, so it's normal for some problems to occur. It's better to be careful. Leader Cersei personally ordered Ender to be arrested. Although I don't know what she did, a rank 1, which was personally ordered by the leader, and she was to be imprisoned in the Dark Pocket Realm. We can't be careless. All right. I'll inform the sisters in the Shadow Kingdom and see if there's anything unusual there. That way, it'll be easy to find out which side is the problem. All right, go. I'll keep watch here, just in case someone sneaks in. After saying that, the body of one of the dark witches suddenly dissolved, and her aura mysteriously disappeared from the stone room. Cersei? It was a direct order from Leader Cersei. Alice, who had rewrapped her spiritual consciousness, was like a specter without a physical body, floating in the stone room, silently watching everything that was happening in front of her. When her spiritual consciousness was calm and completely retracted into the starlight, even if she crashed into the body of the Dark Witch and had intimate contact with her in all aspects, the Dark Witch would not feel it all. When the word Cersei, which was soaked with the bizarre power of destiny, flashed across Alice's mind, her body abruptly shuddered. She was pulled by a force into the Black Tower, and in the next instant, she abruptly floated in a mysterious and bizarre secret chamber. This was a classic witchcraft altar. On top of the gray stone platform stood a tall black figure and a strange mirror in the shape of a flame. In the dim luster, indistinct fine lines could be seen from the smooth surface of the mirror, forming a grand and complicated witchcraft formation. This was not the common 5 lights or 6 lights type of witchcraft formation, but a variety of complicated patterns and runes intertwined and connected with each other, using the complicated light dots to form a ring-shaped witchcraft formation, supporting the dark shadow in the center of the witchcraft formation. That dark shadow hovered and lingered in the witchcraft formation as if it was a living creature, gathering into a huge prismatic crystal. The crystal was blood red, and there was a purple stripe in the center. Under the flow of light, this dark shadow was like the eye of a giant beast in the void, silently scanning everything around it. And when Alice suddenly appeared, it was the moment when the tall black figure on the altar was silently communicating with the eye of the giant beast. The tall figure was shrouded in black shadows, and there were dazzling black spots wriggling and twisting, making it impossible to see the appearance of the figure. However, the figure was rather slender and seemed to be a woman. And when Alice's line of sight focused on her, a pair of eyes as bright as searchlights immediately followed the trail and shot over. What followed was a roar that shook the entire world. Who? Who's there? Alice leaned back, and her head felt as if it had been hit by someone. Blood flowed out of her eyes, ears, mouth, and nose at the same time. Her spiritual consciousness let out a buzzing sound, and the image in front of her instantly shattered. At that moment, Alice felt as if she had suddenly crashed into a tall wall while running at top speed. Her entire spiritual consciousness was numb, and she could not control it. And what was even more terrifying was that the layer of starlight wrapped around her spiritual consciousness was disappearing at the speed of deflagration. In the next moment, the scene in front of her started to rapidly rewind, and everything around her connected into a mottled color block and line that could not be distinguished. Her entire vision started to spin crazily, making her feel dizzy and nauseous. A distant familiar voice was faintly calling out to her. Alice suddenly sat up from the floor, and her unfocused eyes started to focus bit by bit. All right, you've finally woken up. The voice of the magic elf, Helen, rang in her ears. What did you see through the astrology ceremony? Why did you suddenly collapse? Alice wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and held her head that was aching from the extreme consumption of her spiritual power. She forced a smile at Helen. I'm fine. The astrology this time was very successful. Successful? Then why did you still suffer from the backlash? The elf was obviously very confused. Because I overestimated myself and participated in the conspiracy of some high-level experts. How high level? At least as high as grade 4. After sending away the curious elf, Alice stood up shakily with her hands on her head and walked step by step towards the entrance of the astrology hall with difficulty. When she was near the entrance, she suddenly turned around and silently scanned the blue light that had not yet dissipated. Chapter 386. You want me to leave the Tower of Destiny? Grimm yelled in disbelief. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to leave. Alice sighed helplessly. Is there a difference? Of course. Alice smiled bitterly. Because the former is as the master of the Tower of Destiny, while the latter is as an ally. Since you know that we are allies, why did you help us when you needed our strength the most? Because you're a wizard, and this is the territory of the Northern Witches. Alice answered straightforwardly. So you're saying that my existence has caused unnecessary trouble for your identity? Grimm narrowed his eyes. This was the first time he had come into contact with a group of witches, and he instinctively felt uncomfortable. Yes, Alice sighed bitterly once more. Normally, if I had the strength of a Tier 3 or Tier 4, no one would bother me with this issue. But now, what happened? I've told you everything about my advancement. You know that I destroyed the soul projection of the first Witch of Destiny, so her main body in the outer realm must have sensed it. Although she can't enter the sorcerer world, she can still pressure me through some secret means. For example, they could question me through a certain witch leader to the Witch Council. I'm a Witch of Destiny through the War of Destiny, and I've obtained the recognition of the Law of Destiny. They can't deny this, but they can question me for going against the tradition of the Northern Witches and submitting to a wizard. What kind of *T tradition is that? As far as I know, there are wizards in many wizard towers in the north. They're all subordinate wizards. Alice rubbed her forehead and stared at Grimm with her charming big eyes. Do you want me to shout in front of all the witches in the Witch Council that you're my boy toy? Grimm's tall body trembled slightly. When he thought of Alice pointing at his nose and shouting, "He's my boy toy," in front of thousands of witches in a tall and spacious hall, Grimm felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. Can't we say we're allies? Grimm retorted weakly. What do you think? Alice rolled her eyes. The tradition of the Northern Witches has always been that women are supreme. There are even many extreme witches who choose female subordinates to manage the mortal territories under their jurisdiction. They are very hostile to those who violate the traditions of witches. Is this what you saw with your astrology last night? This is only part of it, not everything. Alice's expression suddenly turned serious. Due to the rules of fate, I can't tell you the details, because it involves some deep secrets of the Northern Witches. Once I say it, it will definitely trigger the rules and cause unpredictable changes. So, understood. Grim let out a deep sigh. Then I'll be leaving now. Come with me. Under Alice's lead, the two quickly arrived at a secret room on the 15th floor. There were no items or decorations in this huge space. Only a huge and mysterious spell formation was etched on the floor. Teleportation array? Grim exclaimed softly. He had seen this type of spell formation before. The Cerubo family had used teleportation arrays for a few long-distance teleportations. The one in front of him was obviously a teleportation array. This is the Tower of Destiny's teleportation array. It can directly teleport you to the Scattered Tower Forest region. This will save you from the pain of a long and arduous journey through the dark forest. I'll also give you the coordinates and access to this teleportation array. This way, if you need to come here in the future, you can come directly to the Tower of Destiny. Saying this, Alice separated a ball of light from the rune crystal that controlled the tower. Grim grabbed it and fused it into his body. Beep. Spiritual force data connection request detected. Requesting host's instruction? Connection. Very quickly, a strange set of spatial coordinates flowed into Grim's mind and was quickly stored by the AI chip. At the same time, a more complicated and massive set of data that contained a mysterious force flowed into him. If not for the AI chip, Grim would probably only be able to forcefully memorize it with his powerful spiritual force. It would be impossible for him to analyze it more thoroughly. Ever since the ball of white light fused into his body, Grim could clearly sense every change in the teleportation array beneath him. Grim even had a vague feeling that if the AI chip was given some time to analyze the contents of the Control Authority, his control over the teleportation array would surpass even that of Alice, the owner of the tower. After entering the teleportation array, Grim stood still and smiled at Alice. Continue to keep that Hikila resonance crystal. That way, you can look for me directly if you need anything. You have to be careful while you're working hard here. Before he could finish speaking, a youthful and fiery body threw itself into his arms. Immediately after, Grim's lips were sealed by another pair of fiery red lips. After a long while, Alice placed her hands on Grim's chest and took a step back, carefully looking at his handsome and robust face. Thank you for everything you've done for me, Alice muttered. I only hope that you can understand that no matter what decision you make, I will always stand by your side. Grim stuck out his tongue and licked his lips that had been bitten by Alice. Looking at the beauty whose cheeks were gradually turning red, his heart was burning with passion. These are some things I found in the warehouse. They're all useful to you. Take them with you. Remember, after I've stabilized myself, you have to remember to come back to see me and bring Sister Mary along. Alice gently stuffed a dimensional bag into Grim's arms and took a step back. The milky white halo of the teleportation array gradually engulfed Grim's figure. After a moment, with a slight buzzing sound, the spatial fluctuations in the teleportation array suddenly intensified, and a dazzling white light filled her vision. When everything gradually calmed down and the white light dissipated, the teleportation array was once again revealed to be empty. Grim's tall figure could no longer be seen. Alice inexplicably shed 2 streams of tears. Accompanied by a strong buzzing sound, the white light flickered. Grim felt a sudden dizziness in his head and only regained control of his body when the spatial fluctuations in the outside world stopped. Grim held his forehead and stood there for a while, before slowly opening his eyes and looking around the unfamiliar teleportation room. Welcome to Isbeth City. Judging from the spatial waymark, you've teleported here from the north. However, this spatial waymark seems unfamiliar. Which magus built this teleportation array? A middle-aged magus in a white robe appeared in front of Grim, holding a quill and a sheepskin book. Looking at the silver badge on his chest, he should be the administrator of the Scattered Wizard Association of Terran. The Tower of Destiny. Grim nodded at the other party and prepared to leave the teleportation room. The Tower of Destiny? The white-robed administrator bit on his quill and tilted his head, thinking for a moment. That Magus Tower has not been connected to the teleportation network for thousands of years. Could it be that it has been reactivated? Hey, by the way, you haven't paid for the teleportation maintenance fees yet. Why do I have to pay? Isn't all the energy required for teleportation gathered on the other side of the teleportation array? Why do I have to pay for this side as well? Grim was instantly confused. I can tell that this is the first time you've experienced long-distance teleportation, right? The white-robed Magus snorted coldly. Even though most of the energy required for teleportation is borne by the initiator, as the receiver, our wizard formation here has to withstand a certain amount of spatial shockwaves. So in order to better protect the teleportation wizard formation and serve more of our friends, we have to charge a small amount of maintenance fees. How much? 300 magic crystals. Grim was speechless. The last time he followed a merchant team through the dark forest to the north, it only cost him 200 magic crystals. But today, he had to pay 300 magic crystals to teleport here from the Tower of Destiny. Under normal circumstances, how much did he have to pay to teleport to the Tower of Destiny? The other party quickly provided an answer to this question. 4,000 magic crystals. And this was because the teleportation array in Isbeth City was closest to the north, which was why the fee was so low. If Grim wanted to teleport from the center of the scattered wizard forest to the Tower of Destiny, the fee would be as high as 5,000 magic crystals. If he wanted to teleport from the Silver Alliance on the west side of the continent to the north, the fee would skyrocket to tens of thousands of magic crystals. Hearing this basic fee, Grim forced himself not to let the muscles on his face twitch. No wonder so many low-level magi would rather take a flying ship or follow a merchant team to cross the dark forest, even though there were wizard towers and teleportation spell formations everywhere. They were unwilling to use the teleportation spell formations. So the main reason was that the cost of teleportation was ridiculously high. According to the explanation of the white-robed Magus, the reason why the teleportation spell formation was so expensive was because it consumed a large amount of energy stored in the wizard's pagoda. That was why they had to charge a fee to make up for the loss of the wizard's pagoda. Hearing this, Grim could not help but feel a fire burning in his heart. He still had a void stone hidden in his storage belt. If he used it to build a teleportation spell formation, he could automatically replenish the space energy consumed. Wouldn't that mean that he would have an endless supply of magic crystals? Chapter 387. In just half an hour, the news of the fire demon's return had spread throughout Ferdinand City. Half a day later, half of the scattered Talon region had received the news as well. With Grim's status and strength, it was impossible for him to receive such attention. However, Alice, who he knew, had unexpectedly become one of the leaders of the Northern Witches. This was what everyone was really paying attention to. Most of the leaders of the Northern Witches were rank 4 witches. Currently, only the leader of the Winter Witches was a rank 3 witch. If the Cerubo family could ally with such a powerful witch, it would undoubtedly be of great benefit to the family's expansion. Hence, Grim's return was seen by many as an emissary sent by the Witch of Destiny. Once these two great powers of the North and South joined hands, the enemies of the Cerubo family would have a headache. Normally, such matters were extremely secretive. Moreover, the War of Destiny had only ended less than half a month ago. With the seclusion of the scattered Talon region, it was impossible for the news of the witches in the far north to spread here so quickly. However, with the Cerubo family spreading the news, it spread like a plague in the central continent, causing people to be extremely optimistic about the Cerubo family's development. The Cerubo family was currently only a medium-sized family, and they had always dreamed of becoming a large family. However, to become a large family, 2 prerequisites were indispensable. The first was to have a rank 4 magus in the family. Although the old patriarch of the Cerubo family, Lord Cerubo, had the strength of a rank 6 magus, the nurturing of the magi in the family was a hindrance. This made it difficult for the family to gain an obvious advantage in the sorcerer world, which was the source of the Magus world. Currently, the Solubo family only had 2 Tier 3 sorcerers under the Great Wizard Solubo, Senazar and Lord Purple Eye. Neither of them could advance in the next 1 or 200 years. Hence, if they could rope in a rank 4 Magus from outside the family, it would be of great benefit to the family's ranking. As for the second condition, of course, it was the family's overall strength. This included the overall strength of the Magi in the family and the amount of resources occupied by the family. The two complemented each other and were the most comprehensive measure of a Magus family's development potential. In this aspect, the Solubo family had only been established for a short period of time, and their strength had always been rather low. That was why they valued external help so much. As soon as Grimm returned, he was dragged into a secret room by Lord Senazar for a discussion. Hearing that Alice had successfully become a Destiny Witch, Lord Senazar was undoubtedly excited. But after listening to Grimm's brief introduction, she calmed down. "You said that Alice completed her advancement as a Tier 1 Witch of Destiny." Senazar couldn't help but ask again, emphasizing the word Tier 1. Seeing Grimm's silent nod, Senazar, who had always been domineering, fell into deep thought. "So be it then." Senazar sighed. "In any case, you've brought a reliable ally to the family and expanded the family's influence in the north. Being able to establish a relationship with a commander-level witch, in any case, he would have a certain say in the Witch Council. Once this is done, the family will definitely not mistreat you. I'm willing to serve the family." At this point, Grimm had to play along. Senazar nodded. "In order to celebrate the alliance between the family and the Destiny Witches, there will be a celebration banquet in the tower tonight. The surrounding families and organizations will send people to attend. You should prepare yourself. As for the fact that Alice is only a Tier 1 witch, it needs to be kept a secret for now. Everything will be discussed after my representative personally meets Alice." Grimm nodded and took his leave. As soon as he returned to his residence, many of his apprentices and disciples were already waiting at the entrance. After meeting their teacher, they all congratulated him. Meryl did not have any of the airs of a Magus. She even brought her acolytes to join the crowd, bowing and congratulating Grimm. As for the goblin cabbie, he had also rushed over early and was exceptionally eye-catching among the crowd. Grimm smiled and nodded in acknowledgement, then extended his hand and invited Meryl into his residence. Due to the fact that Alice was a rather powerful female Magus in the eyes of many acolytes and disciples, Grimm gave them a brief account of their trip to the northern lands at their request. When he was describing to Lady Senazar, Grimm had obviously omitted the matter of the witch's soul projection. As for this description, he had even omitted the entire struggle for destiny, using the excuse of not knowing anything outside the tower. As for the acolytes and disciples, they excitedly asked if Alice was a Tier 3 witch or a Tier 4 witch. Grimm only smiled and did not answer. After satisfying everyone's curiosity, Grimm told them about the celebration banquet that Senazar had instructed him to do and handed it over to Kodar, Am, and the others. Both the disciples and acolytes were very willing to help. After all, as Grimm's branch rose in status, the acolytes below the rank of Magus were also treated with respect by the family. They were assigned tasks, allocated resources, and received better treatment than acolytes of other branches. Therefore, even though Grimm had been busy all day and did not have much time to manage and nurture them, their core cohesion was still quite high. Of course, part of this was due to Wizard Meryl's efforts. When the disciples led a group of acolytes away to get busy, only Meryl and Cabbie were left in the residence. Only then did Grimm divulge some limited information. When she heard that Alice was only a Tier 1 witch, but was surrounded by a group of high-grade witches with ulterior motives, plotting against her all day long, Meryl's face turned deathly pale. Thinking back to the days when she was just a witch, she already had a lingering fear in her heart. She did not want to recall the painful past. Who would have thought that, after becoming a witch, the risks she faced would only increase? This made her even more anxious. Grimm could also see that Meryl really did not like fighting and killing. She only liked to quietly do what she was supposed to do and in her spare time, she would do some research and experiment to her liking, leisurely living a long and boring life. She did not have any talent in combat, but she was a good admin-type magus. There were actually quite a number of female magi like this, and most of them needed to find a stronger wizard to rely on in order to seek safety and protection of resources. Otherwise, with their weak character and weak fighting ability, they would easily become the prey of other magi. While Meryl was in a daze over Alice, Grim and Cabby had a quick conversation. The focus of their conversation was on the private relationship between Cabby and the Goblin Grand Duke. As for the operation and income of the secret magic shop, Grim only asked about it and did not care about it. Anyway, with the help of Kodar and the others in Ferdinand City, as well as his own reputation, the Goblin Cabby's secret magic shop was getting better and better. It could now support Grim's basic expenses. Seeing that Meryl was really worried about Alice, Grim could only smile bitterly and take out the black Karaji resonance crystal and give it to her. Meryl immediately ran back to her residence with it, as if she had found a treasure. It seemed like she was anxious to get in touch with Alice. When he was the only one left in the residence, Grim activated the defensive spell and took out a multi-dimensional bag. This was a gift from Alice before she left. He had been suppressing his curiosity along the way and did not open it. Now, he finally had the time to slowly look at the contents. Tamanda, in the name of the wind, after a short incantation, the red rope on the multidimensional bag automatically opened up, and a strong elemental light shone from within. Grim curiously penetrated his spiritual force and took them out one by one. The 3 iron stones were red, purple, and blue respectively. The red one could increase his spiritual force by 2 points after activation. The blue one could forcefully absorb an elemental attack of less than 80 degrees, and the purple one was even more precious. It could actually provide a protective barrier of 120 degrees to the soul. As long as the enemy's accumulated attacks did not exceed this limit, it could protect Grim from any damage to the soul. The Flame of Destruction was a famous elemental staff in the wizarding world. It was 2 meters long and completely black. It seemed to be made of some special magic iron alloy. There was a groove at the top of the staff, and a dark red crystal the size of a fist was embedded in it. Grim knew this crystal. It was a star of destruction, a mutated crystal that was fished out from the edge of the Oblivion world. It could transform any kind of fire element power into a kind of destructive flame, giving it a natural annihilation characteristic. This kind of flame was especially good at destroying elemental defensive spells. It was a powerful weapon. Grim's original Flame Lord Scepter was powerful enough for an apprentice. However, ever since he became a wizard, the attack power of the Flame Scepter was not that important anymore. Also, the quasi-wizard level giant fire spirit it could summon could not deal with a wizard-level opponent. In the last few battles, Grim rarely used his original Flame Scepter. Therefore, this wizard-level Flame Staff of Destruction came at the right time. It saved Grim from the awkward situation of not having a good staff to use. Apart from that, Grim also found a strange crystal and a small note in the multidimensional bag. The crystal was the size of a fist and was dark green in color. There was a purple liquid flowing inside. When Grim held the crystal in his hand, a surge of mana fluctuations that had been isolated for a long time surged out, mixed with the fierce aura of an ancient ferocious beast. Dragon Crystal. This was a grade 2 giant dragon core. Judging from the color and magical attribute of the crystal, it was a wind element dragon crystal. Grim let out a sigh. He had invested a lot of resources in Alice, but most of them had been destroyed during the Battle of Destiny. It was obvious that Alice was compensating him in this way. Although Grim was tempted by all these things, the one that moved him the most was Alice's kiss. Grim's face was filled with nostalgia as he slowly opened the last note. There were only a few words written in Alice's handwriting. Chapter 388. The location of the banquet was the Wizard Hall on the 5th floor of the Wizard Tower. To be honest, this was the first time Grim had attended a Magus banquet after his advancement. As the main character of the banquet, Grimm had already been caught by Forgan as a coolie. He stood at the entrance of the hall to welcome the guests. Fanny's Hut, Mandasur Academy, Sun Garden, Arthur family, Busman family, Clovis family, names of various families flooded into Grimm's ears. Some he had seen before, some he had never seen before. All of them put their hands on their chests to congratulate Grimm. Congratulate what? Congratulate the little which Grimm had invested in for successfully turning the tables and becoming the leader of the Northern Witches? Or congratulate the Cerubo family for building a relationship with the Northern Witches and having a bright future? Grimm stood at the entrance with a smile on his face as he cursed in his heart. He greeted every wizard that came and nodded. The rank 2 wizards that came were naturally received by Forgan himself. The rest of the regular wizards were received by Corgan, Merrill, and the others. The quasi-sorcerers, who were usually very influential in the family, could only serve as attendants and provide attentive and considerate service to the sorcerers who arrived. The banquet hall was spacious and bright. The circular tables were filled with all kinds of delicacies and drinks. Attendants disguised as prospective sorcerers shuttled back and forth, continuously serving cups of red wine and fragrant tea to the sorcerers. Since it was a wizard's banquet, there were no bands, female slaves, or maids. Most of the wizards in the banquet were chatting in groups of 2s and 3s with wine glasses in their hands. Most of the time, they would just open their mouths without making a sound. Most of the conversations were done through telepathy or telepathy. However, when Grimm walked around the hall with a glass of wine in his hand, he quickly noticed something strange about the banquet. It seemed like the banquet belonged to the young wizards. Almost all the wizards Grimm saw were under 100 years old. Many of them were new wizards who had only been promoted for less than 10 years. In the words of a veteran sorcerer, these guys still had the smell of milk on them. They were full of passion and fantasies, and the topics they talked about were always exploration, battle, and sex. Compared to veteran magi, newly advanced magi usually did not have much in the way of resources. Most of the resources they had were probably used up in the advancement ceremony. And at this time, they were complacent, but they were short of money. They didn't have the witchcraft knowledge needed for the advanced research, and they didn't have the resources needed for the larger witchcraft experiments. Therefore, after stabilizing their mental power, the first thing they were eager to do was to explore and explore. They didn't have the qualifications to participate in the sorcerer wars within the family, and the planar wars outside the realm were too dangerous. Therefore, the new sorcerers liked to form small teams and explore the dark forest closest to them. As long as one was careful and didn't go too deep into the dangerous areas, the Black Forest was a land of boundless treasures. Monsters, aberrations, defilers, jungle creatures. These things were everywhere in the dark forest, and many intelligent creatures were no less intelligent than wizards. It would be a good idea to capture them and sell them to high-grade wizards or research them himself. This was a normal training process for a newly advanced magus. For example, Grimm had been thrown into the planar war right after he had advanced. If it weren't for the fact that he had many trump cards, he would have been one of the first to die. Therefore, in the face of a powerful new wizard like Grimm, many male and female wizards raised their wine glasses and enthusiastically chatted with him. There were also a few beautiful witches who took the initiative to invite Grimm to join their team. They agreed to explore some ruins that they had discovered by chance. Grimm did not dare to ignore the ruins they were talking about. Although most of the ruins were left behind from the ancient times, they did not have much value. It could be imagined that if there was anything valuable, it would have been searched by countless senior magi. How could there be anything left? However, there were exceptions to everything. Tens of thousands of years ago, a large number of great wizards were forced to leave the Magus world for the outer regions. There were many secret laboratories and personal residences that they had left behind in the Magus continent. These great wizards were powerful and would usually place their private residences or laboratories in the depths of the dark forest or in the underground world. There were even some strange ruins that could be found on some islands in the endless ocean. Wanting to explore these ruins really tested the luck of the newly advanced magi. If they were lucky, they could find a secret ruin that had been searched by a high-grade wizard. Naturally, they could obtain many resources and materials that high-grade wizards would not be interested in, and it was not very dangerous. As for those who were unlucky, they would rashly enter the ruins of an ancient great wizard that had not yet lost its defensive capabilities. This was not good luck, but bad luck. Whether it was the defensive spell formation left behind, the surviving modified wizard beasts, or the priest's set terrifying curses. None of these were things that ordinary wizards could withstand. Therefore, when exploring any ancient ruins, one had to be extremely careful. Even so, the number of wizards who died in ruins, exploration, and internal strife was still not a small number. However, as long as they succeeded, they could fish out anything from the ancient ruins, and it would be enough for a newly advanced magus to live a carefree life. Apart from exploring and fighting, the topic that these male and female magi talked about the most was sex. For newly advanced magi, apart from collecting resources, materials, and knowledge in the first 100 years, the rest of the time was mostly spent on eating, drinking, and enjoying themselves. And sex was one of the things that they were most excited about. Whether it was a male or a female magus, as long as they liked each other, they could get together. If they were tired of the high and mighty male companion, there were plenty of candidates for them to choose from. The quasi-wizards were hungry for resources, the high-level apprentices who were eager to get into the good graces of the wizards, and even some wizards with a heavy taste were tired of these apprentices who were manipulated by them. So, they set their sights on some handsome humanoid creatures. In low-grade magi auctions, good-looking male and female slaves were always the most expensive goods. If it was a special race with special skills, then the price would be so high that it would leave one speechless. As far as Grimm knew, elves, centaurs, abyss succubi, lustful demons, young giants, and some jungle fairies and mermaids were all high-end goods in auctions. Most of the time, they could not be measured in magic crystals, so they could only be traded with other items. For example, the lewd succubus Grimm saw in the dark pit of Dagon seemed to be a shared plaything of all the magi stationed in the wizard tower. From all the information, Grimm could already draw a conclusion. All magi were selfish, arrogant, and narcissistic. Coupled with the lack of effective external constraints, their behavior was dangerous and reckless. However, when he saw the young magi staring at him with burning eyes, Grimm could not help but comment that he was wild. These young magi were all extraordinarily beautiful, and their clothes were quite revealing. The meticulously tailored magus robes did not hide their beautiful curves, but instead showed off their full and firm breasts. The skirts that were about to reach their navels showed off their beautiful thighs. Even Grimm, who wasn't interested in them, couldn't help but loosen his collar and gulp down the cold red wine when he saw the sexy young witches rubbing and flirting with him. Although Grimm claimed to be an experienced person, his experience was still stuck in his mind and in the memories of the AI chip. Compared to him, any of the young witches in front of him was a true veteran who had been through hundreds of battles. They could easily defeat a rookie like Grimm, who was fierce in appearance but weak in heart, with just a few tricks of her own. Fortunately, when he was being harassed by the passionate witches and was about to flee, he met Meryl, who was holding a glass of wine and swinging it around. Grimm politely nodded to the magi and grabbed Meryl's hand, pretending to talk to her intimately as they walked to a corner of the hall. Meryl could not help but cover her mouth and giggle. I didn't expect Lord Grimm to be so bad at dealing with passionate magi. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Lord Grimm. You don't know, but when I saw Lord Grimm sweating profusely while being pestered by a group of magi, it was so interesting. The latter half of Meryl's words were said by pressing on her right ear, whispering to someone. Grimm looked around in surprise and immediately found a Hikila resonance crystal disguised by a spell next to Meryl's ear. You've been chatting with Alice. Grimm was tongue-tied. Yes. Meryl clenched her fists excitedly. Lady Alice is so amazing. She actually controls a huge Magus tower and can use the energy inside as she pleases. She even asked me to describe everything that happened at the banquet to her, and she listened with great interest. Grimm secretly wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. This was the first time he felt that the nature of women to gossip was universal. Women who dared to use instant messaging from a distance of 40,000 to 50,000 miles were the scariest when it came to wasting resources. Lord Grimm, do you want to talk to Lady Alice? Meryl suddenly raised her head and asked Grimm. Grimm hesitated for a moment, but still firmly refused. Meryl lowered her head and whispered a few words. Then she burst into laughter. Vaguely, Grimm seemed to hear Alice's laughter on the other side. He pulled on his collar. Chapter 389. Pine Towers Town. As the last human settlement east of the Alovis region, it was the only way to enter or exit the Black Forest. Due to the frequent appearance of monsters in the forest, it was one of the most dangerous areas that the Scattered Pagoda Forest Association had marked out. It was almost evening, and the sky was gloomy. In a black carriage heading towards Pine Towers Town, Grimm opened the curtains and carefully observed his surroundings. As far as the eye could see, there was a large stretch of rolling mountains. The mountains were covered with lush green trees that reached the sky. Between the mountains and hills was a winding double carriageway. The carriage he hired was on this mountain road. When he turned around and saw Grimm, the middle-aged man with short hair could not help but remind him, "Sir Wizard, please sit tight. We have to speed up." This mountain road was safe during the day, but once night fell, it became very dangerous. "We have to get to Pine Towers Town before nightfall." Grimm nodded and did not speak. He could see that as the sky gradually darkened, the carriages traveling on this mountain road also began to pick up speed. When two carriages passed each other, the coachman no longer had the mood to talk. They all lowered their heads and hurried on their way. The carriage moved quickly along the mountain road. The condition of the road worsened the further they went, and the more bumpy it became. But everything went smoothly. Before the sky turned completely dark, the carriage arrived at its destination, Pine Towers Town. Pine Towers Town was called a human town, but it was more like a military stronghold. It was a military stronghold surrounded by tall, thick wooden fences. Grimm had visited countless human villages and towns, but he had never seen one with such tight security. The thick wooden fences were made of thick logs cut from the nearby forest. They were 3 meters tall, and the top was sharpened, revealing the white stubble. The wooden gate was covered with a thick layer of metal plates, which were fastened together by large copper rivets. The fence's battlements, turrets, and arrow towers were all there, and there were people patrolling on top of them. When Grimm's black carriage slowly entered the town, the entirety of Pine Towers Town appeared in front of him. This was a relatively deserted and remote town. There was only one street in total, and hundreds of tall wooden houses and houses were arranged on both sides of the street, forming the main body of the town. A few particularly tall buildings had wooden signboards hanging outside, barely revealing their functions. A tavern, and in a blacksmith shop, a grocery store, and a small magic shop. Seeing a magic shop here, Grimm could not help but sigh. The power of witchcraft was indeed omnipresent. The black carriage quickly stopped in front of a simple 2-story wooden building. This was also the only inn in the town. When Grimm got off the carriage, he saw an innkeeper who was rubbing his hands nervously and tried to please him. He was a middle-aged man with short brown hair, dressed in coarse gray linen clothes, and always had a smile on his face. Seeing Grimm's signature wizard robe, the smile on the man's face grew wider. Although his expression was stiff, he was not cowering. Obviously, he was also a guy who often dealt with wizards. "I need a clean and comfortable room." Grimm stood in front of the owner of the inn with his staff in hand. The shadow cast by his 2-meter-tall body almost covered the owner of the inn. "Also, I want to recruit a small local exploration team. Help me spread the word." Grimm said, "Everything will be as you wish." The innkeeper nodded and bowed. "Please follow me." The arrival of an official magus had obviously caused a stir in the town, especially after the innkeeper Jack's announcement. The mercenaries, adventurers, and acolytes who were still in the town immediately became restless. Although Pine Towers Town did not look very impressive, it was extremely famous in the Alovis region. After leaving the town, one would reach the edge of the Black Forest in less than 10 miles northeast of the forest. If one were to go further in, they would encounter all sorts of strange creatures, plants, and beasts that were difficult to find in regular forests. Hence, Pine Towers Town was the last resupply point near the Black Forest. It was also a place that people who wanted to explore the Black Forest had to stop at or pass through. Although the Black Forest was extremely dangerous, as long as one did not go too deep and only wandered around the periphery, it was still possible to find some strange magic plants and beasts. Experienced adventurers would have a high chance of obtaining some spoils of war as long as they had the right combination of professions. The arcane magic shop in the town was a shop that provided basic magic items for adventurers entering and exiting the dark forest, as well as a large number of magic items. In a room that was less than 10 square meters, there was nothing else apart from a bed, a wooden table, and a chair. The table, chair, and bed seemed to be made of mountain wood. They were not meticulously carved or polished, and they even had a trace of the unique fragrance of wood. The conditions of the accommodation were very simple, but considering the environment here, Grimm wasn't picky about anything. In comparison, the food provided by the inn was not bad. Soft bread, green and viscous vegetable soup, and a piece of grilled golden rib from an unknown beast. Grimm tasted it and found that it was not bad. It had the flavor of the mountains, and the energy provided by the rib was also sufficient. Grimm did not discuss the price with the owner of the inn, Jack, and Jack just presented everything to him according to the best standards. As for the price, wizards did not care about money. They only cared about enjoyment. This was also the main reason why Jack was so excited when he saw a wizard. Compared to those haggling adventurers, compared to those stingy sorcerer apprentices who pretended to be generous but were actually stingy, real sorcerers never put gold coins in their eyes. When Grimm was full, he pushed away the plate in front of him and gently wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin. Jack, who had been serving by the side, signaled the maid to remove the utensils with his eyes and said respectfully in a low voice, "Sir Wizard, the people you need are waiting downstairs. You see, bring me down to have a look." Grimm reached for the destructive flame staff on the table and led the way out of the room. The living room on the first floor was already filled with 50 to 60 adventurers who had come to apply for the job. Some of them were dressed like wizard apprentices. Those who could make a living in the Black Forest were all strong and sturdy, and their words and actions were filled with killing intent. Grimm did not go down the stairs. Instead, he stood by the railing on the second floor and looked down at the people in front of him. His eyes were filled with a terrifying pressure that could make people tremble in fear. "I need a small exploration team of 5 to 7 people. It's best if they're veterans with rich experience in the forest." Grimm slowly stated his request. "This time, you don't need to hunt any fierce monsters. You just need to accompany me to explore an area. I'll leave the ordinary beasts to you. If there are really powerful monsters, I'll naturally deal with them. You can keep whatever you get from the journey, but you must complete my exploration mission first." That's the entire mission. There was a slight clamor in the living room. The faces of the people were filled with excitement. Obviously, they did not expect this wizard to promise them such a generous condition. However, Grimm noticed that a few of the adventurers with strong auras had serious and thoughtful expressions on their faces. "I wonder if you can tell us the general area you want to explore?" An experienced adventurer put his hand on his chest and said, "I'm not trying to pry into your secrets. I just want to estimate the risk of this mission." Hearing this adventurer's words, the originally restless crowd once again quieted down. They all focused their attention on the mysterious wizard, Grimm. "The area I want to explore is near the diseased forest," Grimm replied calmly. As soon as the name Disease Forest came out, the crowd on the first floor gasped loudly. Most of them had a look of shock on their faces. Sure enough, it was not that easy to take the money from wizards. Although they did not care about money, and usually paid 5 to 10 times more than normal adventuring missions, the areas they frequented were usually 10 to 100 times more dangerous than normal missions. Diseased Forest. As adventurers who often made a living in the Black Forest, they were very familiar with this name. It was located 300 miles northeast of Pine Tower Town. This meant that if they wanted to reach there, they would have to go 290 miles into the Black Forest. This could already be considered a very dangerous area. Seeing that the adventurers in front of him were frightened by the name of the diseased forest, Grim pressed his right hand on the railing and announced another piece of information. Because this mission is more dangerous, I am willing to pay 200 magic crystals. Grim's words immediately set off a new storm in the crowd. All the adventurers' eyes turned red as they discussed fervently. The hall was in an uproar. Grim could see clearly from his high vantage point. Some of the new mercenaries with young faces shook their heads and left the hall. Some of the older mercenaries also left after careful consideration. Soon, there were less than 10 people left in the hall. My name is Lowy, my lord. I am a level 2 swordsman and shield warrior. I am willing to join your team. Lowy was a tall and sturdy young swordsman. He turned around and pointed at the two people behind him. This is my sister, Farah, a level 3 archer. This is Rhodes, a level 3 thief. Grim's pupils scanned them and scanned their basic data almost instantly. In the sorcerer world, sorcerers were respected, and the other professions were undoubtedly suppressed. The level 2 and level 3 that Loa mentioned were just a symbolic title for ordinary fighters in the human world. It was almost the same as the rank of wizard apprentices. Level 1 was equivalent to a quasi-wizard apprentice. Level 2 was equivalent to a high-level apprentice. Level 3 was equivalent to an intermediate apprentice, and Level 4 was equivalent to a beginner apprentice. Almost all ordinary fighters were divided like this. As for a fighter who could stand shoulder to shoulder with a wizard, sorry, there had never been one in the sorcerer continent. Lowy, who had stepped forward, was only about 27 or 28 years old. Without any elemental talent, he was able to reach level 2 with just his battle techniques and physical training. He could be considered a genius. As for the two behind him, their physical qualities were unprecedented. Grim could not help but nod slightly. It was obvious that the other party was a mature adventurer team. This kind of team was easier to use. Since the rest of the adventurers dared to stay, they were naturally full of confidence in themselves. They all reported their professions and abilities to Grim. Grim nodded and shook his head. In the end, only a level 4 hunter called Neil and an intermediate potion apprentice called Anthony were left. The reason why he chose a level 4 hunter was purely because of Jack's introduction. Neil's fighting skills were not that great, but he was a good cook. The taste of his barbecue was widely praised. Lowy and the other two could only shrug helplessly at Grim's choice. As expected of a noble wizard, even when he went on an adventure in the Black Forest, the most important thing he had to consider was how not to torture his stomach. However, at this time, apart from the 5 people Grim had chosen, there was only a mysterious person covered in a black robe sitting alone in the corner of the hall. When Grim's eyes slowly fell on him, the mysterious person stood up and took off his hood. He bowed and said, "Lord Wizard, we meet again." Chapter 390. Half of her face was covered by a silver metal mask. Her left eye was shining with a scarlet light, and a strange mechanical sound could be heard as she moved her eyeball. Under his powerful elemental sight, Grim was astonished to discover that 1/3 of his body's organs had been replaced by special mechanical constructs. "It's you, Sabrina." Grim quickly matched the figure in front of him with someone in his memory. "I remember you're from the Tracy family in the Woodrow area. Why are you here in the Alobes area?" The mechanical girl with the identity of a quasi-wizard showed a bitter smile, as if she did not want to talk too much. "Sir, I hope to join your team." Sabrina did not know if Grim was planning to hide his identity, so she did not dare to say his name. "A quasi-wizard wants to join?" Grim took out a small pouch from his pocket and tossed it to the lowest sword and shield warrior. "This is the advance payment of 50 magic crystals. Buy all the supplies you need tonight, and we'll leave tomorrow morning." Grim turned to Sabrina. "Come with me. The adventurers downstairs all showed a happy expression. As soon as they sat down in the room, Sabrina, who was wrapped in a traveler's cloak, slowly walked in. Her body was abnormally heavy, and the wooden floorboards under her feet creaked. "Tell me, did you get yourself into some kind of big trouble? Otherwise, why are you injured but not treated?" Grim casually placed the destructive raging flame on the table and stretched his body on the only chair in the room. "Since you've seen through me, I won't hide it anymore." Sabrina was not as spirited as she was in the dark cave. She was now very dispirited. In Grim's elemental sight, Sabrina's life force was chaotic and weak. Her power of the will was also quite weak, as if she was badly injured. "Sir Grim, I'm being chased by my family." "Chased by your own family?" Grim could not help but have a playful look on his face. "I'd like to hear about that." The right side of Sabrina's face was a beautiful face, but the smile on it was so bitter at the moment. "Our Tracy family is a place that specializes in nurturing mechanical magi. If you want to advance successfully, you must nurture your own mechanical heart. 4 years ago, I painstakingly nurtured and modified an excellent mechanical heart, intending to use it to complete the advancement ritual. But it was snatched away. High class. This is our family's internal classification of the machinery heart. The order is secondary, low, medium, high, excellent, and perfect. Perfect mechanical heart has only appeared once. Excellent is already the best we can achieve. Didn't you say that the machinery heart is unique? How did it get stolen?" Grim asked in confusion. As for the mysterious profession of mechanical wizards, even he did not know much about it, and was rather curious about it. "I have to go through the advancement ceremony to activate my mechanical heart and connect all the mechanical organs. Only then can I successfully advance to become a mechanic wizard. However, before I advance, the unactivated mechanical heart can still be stolen." "Who stole your mechanical heart?" Grim asked curiously. "Loker, the descendant of our Tracy family's Tier 2 Magus, Franco," Sabrina said through gritted teeth. "Since Loker has already obtained your mechanical heart, why is he still chasing you?" "That's because he's afraid that I still have some secret method to control the mechanical heart. So, at this point, even without Sabrina's explanation, Grim could more or less guess the rest. It seemed like it was another common case of internal strife between Magi families. Although Sabrina's talent was not bad, her status was obviously not high. She might even be a member of a side branch of the family. Once someone like that matured, they could easily threaten the stability of the family's rule. Hence, among the younger generation of quasi-sorcerers, if her strength surpassed that of the family's quasi-sorcerer, especially when the other party had a powerful background, it was very easy for her to be suppressed. However, for her mechanical heart to be stolen and her name removed from the family, one could see that the Tracy family was quite shady. They actually allowed such a brazen internal strife to take place. "Since you're carrying such a huge burden on your back, do you think I'll still accept you?" Grim could not help but sneer. This was what Grim found the most strange. With Sabrina's current situation, it was impossible for her to get any help from a Magus. After all, helping her would mean provoking a small Magus family with relatively strong combat power like the Tracy family. Moreover, since the Tracy family could become a small Magus family, a Tier 3 Magus was absolutely necessary. No Magus would want to offend a Tier 3 Magus just for a quasi-sorcerer. Don't worry, the Tier 3 Magus in the family doesn't know about this, and he won't do anything about it. If it wasn't for the Tier 2 Magus Franco forcefully interfering, I wouldn't have ended up in such a miserable state," Sabrina hurriedly explained. Grim silently shook his head. Even if there was no Tier 3 Magus, the Tier 2 Magus was not someone he could afford to provoke. To him, what was the difference between a Tier 2 and a Tier 3 Magus? They would both end up dead with a single slap from the Tier 3 Magus. "Lord Grim, if you're willing to accept me, I'm willing to give you information about an ancient ruin." Finally, Sabrina steeled her heart and stated her only price. "An ancient ruin?" Grim sat up straight. "Don't you find it strange?" Since she had already said it, Sabrina did not hold back. I'm just a member of a side branch of the family, and I haven't obtained any precious resources. What right do I have to obtain an excellent mechanical heart? You're saying that you borrowed the power of the ancient ruin? Grim narrowed his eyes. Yes, Sabrina said resolutely. I've only explored the outermost part of the ruin, and I've already obtained such a huge harvest. With your strength, if you went there, you would definitely obtain more than me. Grim looked at Sabrina's haggard face, a blue light flickering in the depths of his eyes. Hey, Chip, can you determine whether her words are true or false? Beep. Based on her electrocardiogram, the authenticity of the existence of the ancient ruin is 98%. The probability of her lying is 2%. Also, based on her brain waves, her words may be misleading or untrue. In other words, the matter of the ancient ruin is true, but the part about her obtaining the mechanical heart is false. Beep. Agreed with host's understanding. Grim and Chip's communication was swift and covert. In the blink of an eye, they had already exchanged countless pieces of information. It was a pity that Alice was not here. Otherwise, Grim would be able to easily determine whether this mechanical girl was telling the truth or not. Grim squinted his eyes and muttered to himself. His right hand lightly tapped on the table, creating the only sound in the silent room. Sabrina held her breath and stared at every expression on Grim's face in fear. That was until she saw the cold smile on Grim's face that was as sharp as a knife. I can let you stay by my side for the time being, Grim said unhurriedly. However, if I find any falsehood in your words, I will not give you to the Tracy family. I will kill you directly. Sabrina's heart relaxed, and a joyful smile finally appeared on her face. She hurriedly bowed to Grim. Go and rest first. Remember to nurse your injuries. We will set off tomorrow. Yes. Sabrina lifted her head and stole a glance at Grim. When she met his dignified gaze, she quickly lowered her head and slowly closed the door before retreating. After the room had regained its silence, Grim tilted his head slightly and said indifferently, Sir, it is not very friendly of you to sneak into my room like this, is it? In the corner of the room that Grim was staring at, in an empty space, a vague figure gradually appeared in the air. I heard that a magus had come to town, so I hurried over to take a look. I did not expect that not only are you stronger than a normal person, but you are also more courageous than a normal person. Gargamel, am impressed. This was a sorcerer with a gloomy face. His hair had already fallen off, leaving only a few sparse tufts of white hair. He wore a gray sorcerer's robe and held a sorcerer's staff in his left hand. The hand that held the staff was dry and skinny, and the joints were distinct, like the claws of a ghost. Gargamel, this name is unfamiliar. I have never heard of it before. Are you here to capture this little girl? Grim looked at the other party in confusion. If not for the fact that he did not sense any hostility from the other party, Grim would have long prepared a full set of defensive spells. After all, for a magus to conceal himself and sneak up to another magus' side, it did not seem like a good thing no matter how one looked at it. All right, there is no need to guess. The moment the Gargamel opened his mouth, he revealed a mouthful of yellow and withered teeth. I have nothing to do with this little girl. I'm just a wandering magus. I have been staying in Pine Tower Town for the past half a year to conduct some magic experiments and purchase some strange items from the Dark Forest. Then why are you here, sir? I heard that you want to go to the Disease Forest. Are you interested in doing something big with this old man? The Gargamel's eyes immediately lit up when he mentioned the purpose of his visit, looking as if he could not wait any longer. Do something big? Grim asked doubtfully. Chapter 391. The Black Forest. This was a dreadful name that was taboo in the Sorcerer Continent. To most people, this was a name that represented death and chaos. If one flipped through the history of the Sorcerer Continent, there would be countless tragic examples. Sorcerer calendar year 13179. In a small human village on the western border of the scattered forest region, The entire village of 120 people disappeared without a trace in one night. According to the sorcerer's investigation, there were traces of mind flayers in the village. Sorcerer calendar year 17281. In the Nalan region of the Northern Witches' Territory, a newly formed human settlement was attacked by a wave of beasts. In 3 days, more than 20,000 people died, and countless more were injured or went missing. Sorcerer calendar year 22765. After the Silver Alliance formed the 17th Rune Corps, they expanded into the depths of the Black Forest. However, they were attacked by terrifying beasts and suffered heavy casualties. Looking through this history, all humans would feel a natural sense of reverence towards the Black Forest. This was an inexhaustible treasure trove of resources, but was also the source of chaos where terrifying beasts gathered. Living next to the beasts, they had to live in fear day and night. They had to worry about the sudden outbreak of a large-scale wave of beasts, and they had to worry about the terrifying beasts escaping from the forest. This kind of life was hard to imagine for those who had not experienced it themselves. That was why the people of Pine Tower Town were trapped here, not daring to step out of the thick walls. Even if they went to the nearby forest to collect firewood during the day, they would have to move in groups. The longest time that the residents of the town had lived here was no more than 5 years. As for the older residents of Pine Tower Town, they had already been swallowed up by the surrounding forest. Among the outsiders that gathered in Pine Tower Town, the majority were mercenaries and adventurers who came to make a living. There were also some acolytes who came to look for materials. They were hired to frequently appear in the nearby forest for some gold coins and magic crystals. They were either searching for some special magical plants, capturing some delicious beasts, or exploring a certain area. In short, the spoils of war that they exchanged for with their blood and lives would eventually appear on a sorcerer's laboratory table or dining table. The team set off early in the morning. Parting the thin mist before dawn, the group passed through the narrow village gate of Pine Tower Town. They put on thick cloaks and quietly entered the forest. Since they had just entered the forest, it was clear that this was still a normal forest. In the middle of a vast sea of lush trees, a huge yellowish-brown cliff stood silently. Like a proud king inspecting his subjects, the cliff was located in the depths of the green forest, surrounded by wisps of white clouds. The top of the cliff was flat and covered with dark brown moss. A gentle breeze blew past, and the waves in the forest surged. Waves of rustling sounds could be heard as a flock of blue birds chased each other from the forest, soaring into the distance. Traversing through such a sea of trees, one's eyes were filled with lush greenery, green flowers, green grasses, green vines, and gray tree trunks. Life force. A faint life force could excite one's spirit. The light in the quiet and dark jungle was not bright. There were branches, vines, and shrubs everywhere. If one wanted to pass through such a jungle without a guide who was familiar with the terrain to lead the way, it would be almost impossible to move an inch. Lowe, who was hired as a sword and shield warrior, had temporarily changed his profession to a sweeper. He carried the round shield on his back and swung his sharp hatchet to chop off the vines and thorns that hindered him. He barely cleared a path in the forest that could allow people to pass through sideways, moving forward with great difficulty. Walking in the primordial forest, the soft and exquisite cloth robes that the sorcerers usually liked to wear were no longer suitable. The horizontal branches and thorny thorns could easily tear their clothes. Therefore, even the sorcerers and apprentices who did not need to do anything could only put on a thick cloak or cloak outside their cloth robes. That way, they could prevent their robes from snagging and falling to the ground. Moreover, these sorcerers who usually hid in the tall wizards' pagodas and tightly guarded laboratories were no longer as arrogant and mysterious as they usually were. Even an ordinary slope could become a huge obstacle for them to advance. Some people threw down vines from above, and some people pushed their waists and buttocks up. Only the Gargamel wizard, who usually lacked physical training, could climb the rocks or short cliffs that were less than 2 to 3 meters tall with great difficulty. On the other hand, Grim, who was also a wizard, displayed a strong physique that was not any weaker than Lois. Not only could he climb over mountains and rivers as if he was walking on flat ground, but he could also imitate the level 3 thief road. He could even climb up a short cliff in a few steps with the help of a vine. This was not the first time that Gargamel stared at his burly body and drooled. To be honest, any newly advanced wizard would have a strong physique like a warrior, a thief's agile body, and an archer's quick reflexes. However, due to years of lack of training, coupled with the corrosion of large amounts of poisonous and harmful wizard materials, there are only a few wizards who could maintain this kind of physical advantage. Seeing Grimm's extraordinary physique, not only did Gargamel not think it was strange, he even revealed a thoughtful expression from time to time. Once upon a time, he also had such an outstanding body. At that time, he could also sing and fight every night. Unfortunately, with the passage of time and the corrosion of the wizard energy, all of this had become a thing of the past. As for him, he was now just an old man who did not look much better than a malicious spirit. However, his powerful wizard energy still made him a terrifying wizard that the people of the world would revere. Once he unleashed his full strength, slaughtering a small town of Pine Tower would be as easy as snapping his fingers. It was a pity that this kind of power could not be used in the Black Forest. With the methods of a wizard, he could simply summon a few flying servants to avoid this annoying journey into the forest and fly to his heart's content in the sky above the Black Forest. However, this kind of thinking was good, but he could not put it into practice. Otherwise, he would definitely die a horrible death. The idea of using a method to fly over the Black Forest was indeed a good idea, but the biggest problem was how to determine his position. Those who had never flown in the sky would never understand the pain of being lost. Flying above the blue sky with a sea of trees and mountains beneath his feet, it might be possible to determine the direction, but to find his destination was an impossible task. The Black Forest stretched for tens of thousands of miles, and trying to find a landmark in the sea of trees that rose and fell with the wind was simply a joke. The Black Forest's unique high magic environment also made many detection and prophecy spells seem wrong. The magic wand of prophecy was not very useful here, and many times it would even lead you directly to the nest of a terrifying monster. Also, flying in the sky was very eye-catching, and it was easy to become a target for powerful monsters. The monsters in the Black Forest all had a strong sense of territory. If you quietly sneak past the edge of their territory, they would not be able to sense you. However, if you were to seek death by flying over their heads, using your bones to decorate their caves, this may be your only fate. The 10 miles of forest ahead was just a small trial for the difficult journey ahead. As they went deeper, the greenery in the forest gradually turned dark and gloomy. Once they passed the border of the forest, it was a completely different and strange world as far as the eye could see. Looking up, the sky above the Black Forest was filled with black tree crowns that covered the sun, like a night sky filled with stars. The black leaves were stacked layer by layer, blocking the clear sky outside, forming the deepest and darkest curtain of the night. The flickering light was like the faint blue fluorescence of fireflies that could be seen everywhere in the forest. It was these fireflies that added a strange sense of beauty to the night sky here. Other than the beautiful night sky scenery, the environment of the Black Forest was especially elegant. The forest was filled with the fragrance of flowers, and the entire ground was covered with green grass that reached one's ankles. Stepping on it was like stepping on an exquisite velvet carpet, so soft that it made one want to lie down and roll on it. To be honest, every part of the Black Forest had a completely different style and tone. If the Black Forest in the north was full of gloominess, darkness, and chaos, then the Black Forest in front of them was full of magic, strangeness, and magnificence. It was as if Grimm's group had suddenly entered a magic forest. Everywhere was overflowing with magical aura, and everywhere was full of beauty and beauty. It was the first time many of them had seen such a beautiful scenery, and they were a little stunned. Loe and the others who frequented this place all year round also straightened their backs and wiped the sweat off their foreheads, letting go of their worries and enjoying the strange scenery here. Grim silently scanned everything in front of him, and what appeared in his elemental vision was a completely different world. In the dark forest, traces of magical energy flowed. They were inexhaustible nourishment for magic, nourishing and strengthening the world in front of them bit by bit. In Grimm's vision, every blade of grass, tree, flower, and bird contained elemental particles that represented magical energy. The red was fire, the cyan was wind, the brown was earth, the green was wood, the blue was water, and the purple was the mind. Layer by layer, block by block, the dense mana energy soaked the entire forest in a sea of mana. In such an environment, as long as it was not an ignorant stone, it could nurture enough intelligence and give birth to intelligent beings that could rival magi. Chapter 392. The omnipresent magical power had its own characteristics. In different regions, the magical power would take on completely different forms. Grimm didn't know how it would be in other regions, but in this region, the magical power was gentle and tame. But no matter how gentle and tame the magical power was, it was still extremely dangerous to ordinary people. Grimm's elemental vision could clearly see that there were still many dangers lurking in this beautiful and strange magical scene. The terrifying piebald wolf spiders crouched among the colorful wildflowers, and if outsiders got too close, they would be attacked by them. The green toads were green and curled up in the same green grass, and anyone who stepped on them would definitely be sprayed with acid. The bamboo snakes wrapped their tails around the tall branches and hung their bodies motionlessly, pretending to be harmless vines. It was difficult for ordinary people to see these dangers with the naked eye, and Grimm had to rely on the abnormal concentration of magical power to detect their existence. The reason why Lowy and the others were able to survive in such a dangerous magical forest was because of the experience and skills they had accumulated through countless lives. Torches were lit one after another, and an indescribably strange smell wafted out from them. To be honest, it was very strange. When Lowy held a torch in one hand and waved a hatchet in the other, the hidden monsters moved their bodies and made way for them. In an instant, countless bodies wriggled and curled up in the grass, shrubs, and branches. Soon, a clean path appeared in front of them. Insect-repellent powder. Gargamel bared his yellow teeth and shook a small pouch at Grimm's waist, which also emitted the same strange smell. Grimm looked down at his waist. There was also a pouch there, which Lowy had specially asked him to wear outside his clothes. He didn't expect it to have the ability to repel small insects. With them, the team could save a lot of unnecessary trouble. The team finally began to move slowly in the dark forest. The mediocre grade 3 thief, Road, was like a fish in water, and he seemed to be abnormally relaxed. After a simple greeting to Lowy, he took the lead and disappeared into the dense and lush forest. It wasn't until the other party sent a hidden signal in the distant forest that Lowy strode forward with a torch and a hatchet in his hand. Of course, the vines, bushes, and thorns along the way were all cut down by him to avoid affecting the two wizards and the apprentice's movements. But even so, in the dense forest where the roots were intertwined, every step forward was a painful ordeal. They would either have their clothes caught in the thorns, or they would be whipped in the face by branches, or they would be tripped by thick roots protruding from the ground. For some spellcasters who lacked training, the primitive jungle was simply the best place to torture people. However, Magi and acolytes were not weaklings. His body, which had been nourished by magic medicines, was now in a far better condition than ordinary human beings. Summoning some wind elementals to wrap around their bodies, they could instantly become as agile as thieves. The protective force field that lingered around their bodies could even help them block some insidious and vicious attacks. Insect repellent was not a panacea. There would always be some strange creatures that could avoid their detection and sneak up to them before launching a surprise attack. Archer Farah put away her longbow and lightly held a dagger with both hands, using the sharp blade to cut the poisonous snakes and blood-sucking leeches that pounced on her in half in the air. Under her protection, the level 4 Hunter Neil and a few acolytes were unharmed. As for the two wizards, they did not need her help at all. The Gargamel wizard, who looked like an old man, was simply the source of poison that was soaked in a poison pot. Any foreign creature that approached him would be poisoned to death in an instant and then festered into a puddle of acid. Grim, who was walking at the back, was even stranger. There was a faint layer of bright red light around his body. Any creature that entered this light layer would be instantly incinerated into ashes, leaving only a small amount of gray powder behind him. Flame barrier. After seeing this layer of light, the acolytes silently called out this name in their hearts and cast envious gazes at him. If they chose to learn fire element sorcery, after going through rigorous learning of sorcery knowledge, it would take them at least 3 to 5 years to 10 years to master this kind of flame boundary that could attack and defend. However, this required them to have an extremely high affinity for fire. Otherwise, they would have to be mentally prepared to grind on a high-temperature barrier for the rest of their lives. Sabrina turned around and glanced at Grimm's relaxed performance. The sourness in her heart could almost drown her. Not long ago, when they carried out the mission together in the dark crypt, Grimm was just an ordinary acolyte who had just reached the intermediate level. Sabrina's remaining attention was mainly focused on Mary, who was even more eye-catching. Who would have thought that in less than 10 years, Mary had already become a terrifying wizard that was feared and feared by everyone? She, on the other hand, was still stuck at the level of a quasi-wizard, and even was involved in a family conspiracy that could have crushed her to pieces. The strange things that happened in this world made people sigh, and at the same time, they were filled with sorrow. God, what kind of factor could have caused two people with vastly different statuses to have their fates, identities, and positions completely reversed? Could it be that I'm not persistent enough in my pursuit of witchcraft, or is fate playing a joke on me? The boiling emotions made Sabrina's mind restless, and the injuries in her body started to hurt again. Sabrina let out a bitter sigh. She took out a black water bottle from her waist pouch and took a sip of water. What she drank was not water, but a sticky and pungent bioactive concoction. Many of the human organs in her body had been replaced by strange mechanical creations. Now that she lacked a mechanical heart to fuse them with her original life system, the conflict between her flesh and mechanical spells was unavoidable. Therefore, she had to drink this foul-smelling engine oil every day to ease the conflict that was about to erupt in her body. This was also one of the pains that acolytes on the path of mechanical wizards had to endure. Finally, after trekking with difficulty for 4 hours, the small team stopped at the foot of a low cliff 30 kilometers deep into the dark forest and began to prepare for the night's camping. Although there were still 2 hours before nightfall, it was not easy to find such a remote area that was sheltered from the wind. Therefore, in order to avoid being unable to find a temporary lodging, Loey asked Grimm for permission and set up camp in advance. After all, it was the first day the team set off. Before everyone familiarized themselves with each other, they had to save some strength to deal with the frequent changes in the dark forest. It had to be said that the rich species and terrifying magical creatures in the dark forest were an eye-opener for Grimm, who had entered it for the first time. Whether it was the bouncing little white rabbits or the sharp-toothed guinea pigs, they were all small animals that hunters loved the most outside the dark forest. But here, they seemed to have been cast by a berserk spell. They crazily crawled out of some hole and attacked the team without any hesitation. Grimm had seen with his own eyes that every time the tame and cute little white rabbits pounced on Loey, they would leave clear claw marks on the surface of Loa's metal-round shield. The big-eared guinea pig's sharp teeth could even make Loa's longsword crunch. Grimm could clearly see that their eyes were blood-red, and their minds were wild and chaotic. Chaotic magical energy was boiling in their bodies. Every now and then, some of the smaller animals could release strange attacks like wind blades, fireballs, and earth spears. It could be seen that if they were given some time, they might be able to grow into magical creatures with magic power. However, Most of them would probably self-destruct due to the disorder of their magical energy. It could be seen from their bodies that the dense magic power that pervaded the Black Forest had an all-encompassing and pervasive effect on them. The entire Dark Forest was like a huge witchcraft laboratory. Creatures that refused to accept the magical energy's modification would only die. Only the magical creatures that could withstand the infusion of magical energy and survive would have the right to live a better life here. At this point, Grimm's Species Studies and Magical Creatures Illustrated Handbook in his chip needed to be updated and corrected. In a vast, dark forest, strange monsters that the Magi had never seen before would be born almost every moment. They would also return to the dark forest after fighting and killing day and night. Through this endless cycle, the mutated and unstable elements were all digested and absorbed. Only the stable and powerful mutants could survive and become the new species of the dark forest. The cause of all this was the huge dark forest that no one could see through. While the others were busy gathering firewood, setting up tents, searching for water, and hunting, Gargamel pulled Grimm to the top of the cliff. He took out a magic tool that looked like a compass and began to measure it. Is the forest demon you mentioned really nearby? This place is very close to the edge of the dark forest. If it really has intelligence, it shouldn't have chosen a place like this as its territory. Grimm asked doubtfully. Forest demon? What kind of intelligent forest demon was this? Just as Grimm's doubts rose, the information stored in the AI chip flowed into his mind. Forest demon, a natural-type magical creature with intelligence. It was a type of magical plant formed after the soul of a dead magical creature fused with a natural tree spirit. Its life form was similar to the flower spirit Grimm had seen in the Dark Crypt. However, one was a natural creation by chance, while the other was a witchcraft of an evil wizard. Chapter 393. To be honest, forest demons were similar to undead creatures with spiritual bodies. They were a kind of forest spirit that was formed by fusing the essence of plants with the souls of magical creatures. Depending on the materials used, they would have strange witchcraft abilities. As a type of magus rank magical creature, their strength was directly related to the abilities they possessed. There is a huge difference between strong and weak abilities. For example, some forest demons that had the ability to revive were almost invincible in the forest. Any injuries on their bodies could be healed by absorbing the magic energy from the plants around them, and magic energy was everywhere in the dark forest. So without the ability to defeat them in one fell swoop, it was almost impossible to capture them. Just as he was lost in his reverie, a strange cry from a magical creature came from the horizon. A magical creature is coming. Let's hide for a while. Gargamel took out a pouch from his robes and sprinkled some yellow powder on the two of them. Their figures quickly became blurry and transparent. By the time the distant magical creature flew past the edge of the forest, they could no longer see anything on the cliff. Even their auras had disappeared. Although the people at the bottom of the cliff did not have such mystical methods, they still had some simple deodorant powder. With the cover of the dense forest, they did not have to worry about being discovered by the big guy flying in the distance. Grimm raised his head to take a closer look. This was a two-legged wyvern covered in greenish-gray scales. Looking at its short tail and the flower crown on its skull, it could be deduced that its innate spell was acidic. It was also the most common flying type of magical creature in the forest. Beep. High-energy magic creature discovered. Green wyvern, acidic wyvern. Legend has it that it has the bloodline of a giant dragon and a griffin. It has membranous wings and can fly. Basic stats are as follows. Strength 7, Agility 4, Vitality 5, Spiritual Force 2. Overall strength. Rank of an official magus. This two-legged wyvern's strength and agility were more than double his, and its vitality was slightly higher. The only thing he could suppress it in was his spiritual force. He was 7, and it was 2. This was probably the only thing he could use to comfort himself. Grimm relied on the AI chip's passive detection to estimate the two-legged wyvern's basic stats while trying to figure out its true strength. After all, the AI chip's detection was just data on paper and could not fully represent a creature's true strength. Apart from its thick skin and long vitality, the wyvern in front of him had almost no other merits. Although it was also a subspecies of dragon, the giant dragon bloodline in its body was too thin. Instead, its mother's griffin bloodline was richer. Many wizard families with dragon bloodlines had the urge to expel the wyverns from the dragon subspecies. Although this fellow looked like a dragon, the giant dragon bloodline in his body was so thin that it couldn't even compare to the kobold's underground. He was really just a good-looking but useless guy. Although it looked ferocious and could fly, on paper, its strength was on par with an official sorcerer. But in a one-on-one fight, the wizards had too many ways to kill it. The most despicable thing about them was their intelligence. A subspecies of dragon only had the instincts of a bloodthirsty monster and did not even have basic intelligence. It was easy for magi to set up a trap and kill it. However, wyverns were magical creatures that lived in groups. Usually, 7 or 10 of them lived in groups. Unless it was necessary, wizards were not willing to provoke these vengeful creatures that would explode with a single poke. This wyvern had obviously come out to hunt. It spread its membranous wings that were covered in thin scales, and its huge and ferocious body flew over the treetops with a strong gust of wind. The stench of a subspecies of dragon spread in all directions. In the lush forest, the sound of branches breaking could be heard. This was the sound of large animals frantically fleeing. For a moment, the forest was filled with birds and beasts, as if it was the end of the world. The wyvern spread its wings and circled above the sea of trees, before suddenly plunging into the dense forest. In the forest, the ground and mountains began to shake. The short howls of all kinds of animals rose and fell, and the tall, ancient trees began to shake violently. A moment later, there was a gust of wind, and the wyvern struggled to flap its wings and fly back into the sky. Its thick hind legs tightly gripped a wild boar the size of a calf. With an excited and mournful cry, the wyvern streaked across the sky and disappeared into the depths of the forest. Are monsters of this level common in the Black Forest? Grimm could not help but ask softly. Not very common, but as common as the hairs on a cow. A sinister smile appeared on Gargamel's face. We are now only at the edge of the Black Forest. Once we go more than 100 miles in, you will know how many monsters there are. So, no matter how strong you are, it's useless here. If you can't kill enough monsters, just by piling them up, you will die. If you want to live a stable life, you have to rely on nothing else but keeping a low profile and hiding. No wonder those magi like to form teams to train in the Black Forest. This place is indeed not suitable for lone magi. Gia. Lone magi coming here is simply sending themselves to death. Most of the rank 2 and above monsters have their own territories and won't easily trespass. But who could say for sure about this kind of thing? If you meet a rank 2 monster that roams around, a lone magus won't even have the chance to escape. It's not that easy to meet a rank 2 monster, right? Gia. Within 500 miles of the Black Forest, the chances of meeting a rank 2 monster are very small. Only those rank 2 monsters that lose their territories will occasionally wander here. However, once you go more than 1,000 miles into the Black Forest, it will be the territory of rank 2 monsters. How intelligent are they? Don't look down on them. In terms of intelligence, those monsters are not inferior to us magi. It's just that their knowledge and inheritance is too lacking, which is why they're suppressed by us in the Black Forest. Why can't these monsters gather together and form a large and unified organization to fight against us? With their intelligence, they should be able to do this. Gia. With their intelligence, they should be able to do this. However, it will be very difficult for them to be ambitious. After all, the races of the monsters are too mixed, unlike us who have a large human race as our foundation. Moreover, the monsters have always believed in the strong. If you want to make another fellow lower its head, the only way is to beat it into submission. So even if one or two strong monsters have the intention to do so, they don't have the ability. Taking advantage of the fact that the mercenaries were busy preparing dinner, the two magi decided to converse on the short cliff. Although Grimm had gathered a large amount of knowledge through the AI chip, he could only turn this knowledge into actual experience and enrich his understanding of the Magus world through communication with other magi. Only then would he be able to directly observe the information firsthand. Their dinner was fried rabbit meat. The meat was probably the ferocious white rabbit that was as large as a mastiff. But it had to be said that this kind of ordinary magical creature that was soaked in dense magical aura, apart from the delicious taste of its meat, when the juicy meat was swallowed, a thick warm current would surge in the body. The faint magic energy that was emitted from the meat would slowly nourish the body of the person who ate it, and it would have a beneficial effect on the vitality. Grimm's vitality had now reached 4 points, and his strength had reached 3 points. He was even stronger than the sword-shield warrior Lowy, who specialized in training his body. What did he rely on? It was the subtle and slow nourishment brought about by the magic energy meal that he ate day after day. However, as his vitality increased, these low-ranked monsters could no longer give him any increase in vitality or strength. At most, they could help him recover the damage to his physical body and spirit. If he wanted to rely on food to strengthen his vitality, he would have to find a way to capture some high-ranked monsters, such as the wyvern. Otherwise, the price of the magic energy meal provided by the Magus Tower was something that even an elite Magus like him could not afford. Therefore, in the future, it would be much more convenient to set up his wizard tower near the Black Forest to hunt those low-ranked monsters. After dinner, the two magi went into their own tents and used simple spells to seal them up. Only then did they begin their daily meditation. Since they were in the wild, no wizard dared to enter deep meditation, so the effect of meditation was very poor. However, no matter how small an improvement was, it was still an improvement. Therefore, meditation was still a basic daily routine for wizards. Wizards needed absolute silence when they meditated, so the people in the camp stopped all actions that could disturb the two wizards. They quietly tidied up their equipment. The thief named Rode slipped out of the camp without saying a word and began to set up simple traps and mechanisms around the camp. For a guy like him, his ability to fight head-on wasn't that great, but when it came to hiding and setting up traps, he was an expert. After dinner, Sabrina, who had the identity of a prospective wizard, sat by the campfire in a daze. The other intermediate apprentice, named Anthony, could only shrug his shoulders and take the initiative to set up a warning spell around the camp. Although he was a potioneering apprentice, he had the strength of an intermediate level. Of course, he had mastered this kind of universal witchcraft. Now that he was the weakest in the camp, he had to do all the dirty work. 3 hours later, as night fell, Grimm and Gargamel finished their respective meditation and came out of their tents. Lord Grimm and I have some matters to take care of. You guys guard this camp and don't run around. Gargamel took out a small cloth bag and threw it to Anthony. Every hour, sprinkle some powder into the campfire. This way, there won't be any low-ranked monsters attacking. You come with us. Gargamel pointed at Sabrina, who was in a daze. A prospective wizard was not very useful in hunting down wizard-rank monsters, but she was more than enough to be a meat shield. Chapter 394. Under the night sky, the Black Forest was still a magical land filled with a strange and fantastical feeling. Under the cover of the layers of branches and leaves, the bright moonlight of the huge moon in the sky shone through the gaps, forming a beautiful pillar of light in the pitch-black forest. Under the moonlight, the plants that had a strong magical aura emitted a strange fluorescence that was invisible to the naked eye. In the eyes of ordinary people, the Black Forest was always shrouded in thick darkness. However, for wizards who had mastered the power of the elements, it was as bright as day, with strange fireflies floating everywhere. Walking between the ancient trees that were nearly 100 meters tall, Grim couldn't help but secretly admire the magic of the wizard world. Tall, ancient trees could be seen everywhere, each with a trunk as thick as 3 people holding hands. Underneath the tall, ancient trees were dense bushes and colorful mushrooms. Matsutake mushrooms, agaric mushrooms, radiant mushrooms, shimmering mushrooms, fluorescent moss. All of the mushrooms and moss silently emitted a strange light in the darkness. There were red, green, purple, blue, gray, all sorts of colors, and so on. Twisting vines wrapped around the trunks like snakes, densely packed and layered. The ends of the vines reached the top of the tree, making it impossible to see what was going on. This was a world full of splendor and vitality. Sabrina carefully walked behind the 2 wizards, trying her best to keep a distance from them. If they were too far away, it would be difficult for her to get help from them if anything happened. And if they were too close around the 2 wizards, there was a hidden protective force field that was difficult to see with the naked eye. Normally, it was invisible, but once an object entered it, it would immediately activate the spell. Grimm's protective force field was highly toxic, and regardless of whether it was a plant or a living creature, it would directly poison them to death. Sabrina had already seen several insects emitting fluorescent light touch his periphery. Then, the light of life directly extinguished and floated down. As for Grimm, the protective force field outside his body was a fire barrier. Any object, whether alive or dead, would spontaneously combust as soon as it entered the fire barrier, turning into piles of ashes that slowly scattered. Wherever he walked, he left a path of ashes behind him. Sabrina did not dare to take a wrong step when walking with these 2 wizards. Once she accidentally stepped into their defensive force field, she might not be able to escape unscathed even with her quasi-wizard level power. Wizard Gargamel held a compass-like tool in his hand as he led the way. Every time he lowered his head to look at the tool, he would adjust the direction he was heading in as if he was tracking something. The Black Forest was also full of danger at night. This was not the first time the 3 of them had encountered those strange monsters. These monsters were like ghosts walking in the dark, moving silently between the shrubs and vines. When they discovered Grimm and the other 2, they immediately lurked in the shadows and silently followed them. However, the smarter demonic creatures quickly sensed their strength and disappeared without a trace. Only those monsters that were too bloodthirsty or had low intelligence would not be able to resist the temptation of flesh and blood. They would roar and rush forward. These blind guys were all taken care of by Sabrina. The strength of a quasi-wizard was nothing to a wizard, but it was more than enough to deal with these monsters that only had the strength of a senior apprentice. Grimm stood quietly in the darkness, silently observing Sabrina's fighting style. After replacing parts of her limbs and organs with mechanical creations, Sabrina also had a unique and highly efficient way of fighting. The mechanical eyes hidden under the half-silver mask clearly possessed special visual abilities, not being affected by the strange environment here. The mechanical left hand hidden under her cloak was not only her weapon, but also her shield. A Nightmare's Panther jumped down from a 10-meter-tall tree with the help of Shadow's sneak, but it was punched away by Sabrina's indestructible left fist. Grimm raised his eyebrows as he watched the Nightmare's Panther's heavy body fly into the distance, breaking countless vines and crashing into the bushes. 3 points of strength. Although Sabrina was still an apprentice, she was not weaker than him in terms of strength. To put it bluntly, if she did not transform into a Balrog, Grimm would not be able to suppress her in terms of strength. The Nightmare's Panther's black body covered with strange magic runes slowly walked out from the messy bushes. Its beautiful black fur was covered with broken grass and green moss. It was obvious that the fierce attack just now had injured it. It slowly wandered around the 3 of them, letting out low growls from its throat. The Gargamel wizard could not help but let out an impatient snort. Sabrina had no choice but to approach the Nightmare's Panther in order to quickly end the battle. The human's provocation had obviously angered the Nightmare's Panther. It slightly lowered its body, leaving claw marks on the ground with its thick and powerful limbs. Its strong and agile body turned into a constantly moving black light and pounced toward Sabrina rapidly. This time, Sabrina did not choose to punch the Nightmare's panther away. Instead, the mechanical hand on Sabrina's left suddenly shot out and grabbed the Nightmare's panther that was still in midair. Then, 7 or 8 crescent blades shot out from her body in one breath, madly spinning and drilling into the Nightmare's panther's body. After all, the Nightmare's panther was only an agile type of magical creature. Most of its abilities were in shadow, sneak, and quick claws. The surface defense of its body could not withstand this strange mechanical attack. Puff, puff, puff. The Nightmare's panther's body burst into 7 or 8 large balloons of blood. It opened its mouth wide, but before it could even scream in pain, its mouth was pierced by a mechanical tentacle that looked like a spinning top. Puff! A bloody spinning top pierced out from the back of the Nightmare's panther's neck. The tip of the spike was still spinning wildly, and purple blood droplets were scattered everywhere. Plop! The Nightmare's panther's corpse was thrown to the side, and Sabrina struggled to breathe. Although the Nightmare's panther did not touch her body in the short battle just now, the fierce magical creature's strong physique and violent impact still made her feel very uncomfortable. Several parts of her internal organs faintly ached again. "Let's go." Gargamel, who had been waiting anxiously, once again took the lead and walked in front. He'd already come into contact with that detestable forest demon many times, and every single time, it was due to some accident that the forest demon slipped out of his grasp. Although he wanted to invite a few wizards to help him capture this cunning forest spirit, he was worried that he would not be able to compete with the greedy wizards from his family. Hence, when he met Grim, a magus who was planning to barge into the dark forest alone, he couldn't wait to send him an invitation. And the price he had to pay for this forest spirit was... The forest spirit was not a powerful magical creature, but its ability was rather strange. That was why it rarely had a fixed territory. Instead, it would wander freely between the territories of other magical creatures, looking for souls to devour. Moreover, Gargamel's intelligence in tracking this forest monster is extremely high. Many times, it can even preset traps for Gargamel to step into, causing him to be unable to escape. Last time, the forest spirit lured Gargamel into the hunting grounds of a large group of Ankhegs. If not for Gargamel's good luck, he would have been devoured by the forest spirit instead. However, he was seriously injured and had to recuperate for half a year to recover. This time, the Gargamel lowered his head and carefully examined the magic tool in his hand. The compass needle on the disc was spinning crazily. "Damn it!" Gargamel cursed in a low voice. "That bastard is doing this again." It deliberately left its aura everywhere in the forest, making us unable to grasp its direction. Then, when we are distracted, it will lure us into the territory of a certain magical creature. I won't fall for it this time. Gargamel put away his magic tool and lightly stomped his foot. From the shadows below him, a mysterious black cat with glossy fur drilled out. Magic pet. Grim's eyes widened. A magic pet was a magic pet that every wizard could form a contract with. Not only could it expand a wizard's innate abilities, it could also be a good helper. However, from Grim's point of view, the magic pet's ability was not enough to offset its weakness. Once a magic pet died, a wizard would not only lose a helper, but also a portion of the spiritual force used for the sacrifice. Grim's current spiritual force was 7 points. If he lost 2 to 3 points in an instant, it would be enough to severely damage his spiritual space. Therefore, before he found a suitable target, Grim did not want to give himself an irreparable flaw. After all, not every wizard could equip their magic pets as well as they could. For a wandering wizard like Gargamel, it was only natural that he would have a black cat as a pet. The black cat lightly leaped up and crouched on Gargamel's shoulder, whispering with its head. "Tell me, Gargamel, what do you want this time when you summon me?" The lazy black cat stretched its back and yawned as it asked in a bad mood. "Help me find that forest spirit, and I'll give you 2 magic flame fish." TSK, I haven't even fulfilled the Gisanguo I promised last time. This time, you're trying to trick me again. Go, go. I promise to fulfill the promise this time. Be careful, don't let that forest spirit find you. Chapter 395. Grim could not help but reveal an expression of surprise. The black cat did not use any spatial spells as it ran, but its body seemed to be shuttling through many different worlds, appearing and disappearing. If one were to close their eyes and examine it closely, they would find that not only was the black cat silent when it ran, they could not even sense the aura of a living being's bloodline or soul. It looked like a realistic phantom created by a spell, and there was no information about it that could be tracked. There were no energy undulations, no magic undulations, no body temperature, no soul aura. This black cat was not ordinary. It was not wise to start a massacre in the Black Forest. For most monsters, avoiding them was the wisest choice. Otherwise, the smell of blood left behind after the monster's death would likely attract all the predators within a radius of dozens of miles, turning a forest chase into an endless forest massacre. Grim and the other two followed the black cat through the forest. Along the way, they encountered ferocious beasts and terrifying monsters that were hiding in the dark. Every time this happened, Gargamel would raise the staff in his hand and gently shake it. A bag of materials hung at the tip of the staff emitted a pale yellow glow. The wild beasts and monsters would run away with their tails between their legs, as if they had seen a terrifying demon. Fear. The A.I. Chip's feedback to Grim quickly revealed the characteristics of the pale yellow glow, but he did not know what materials Gargamel used. After interacting with Gargamel during this journey, Grim deduced that this Gargamel was a potioneering master, and the potioneering acolyte called Anthony was most likely his disciple. Otherwise, it would be too strange for a small town to suddenly have two potioneering masters. Most of his spells were focused on potions, and his actual combat ability was a mess. Otherwise, he would not have brought a quasi-wizard with him to act as a meat shield. However, Grim did not dare to let his guard down against this kind of wandering magus. A magus that could continue his research without the help of his family definitely had one or two trump cards that others could not see through. Moreover, without the ties of his family, he would not be bound by the laws of magi. They had done a lot of dirty work, such as killing the enemy and luring the enemy into a trap. As long as they kept their hands and feet clean and changed their location after every shot, those inexperienced sorcerers would easily become their prey. That was why Grim didn't dare to trust this guy too much. He cautiously enveloped himself in a flame barrier and followed behind the group with large strides. Even with Grim's physique, he could not help but pant slightly as he passed through streams and mountains. As for Gargamel, who had an even worse physique, his thin and withered chest was already bellowing. If he didn't grab Sabrina's shoulder for support, he would have already knelt on the ground. Sabrina, on the other hand, relied on her semi-mechanized body. From time to time, her mechanical tentacles would fly out and grab onto the tree trunk for support. Only then did she manage to keep up with the black cat's nimble and light body. But even so, when the black cat suddenly stopped in front of a pitch-black cave, Sabrina was already sweating profusely and out of breath. 80 li. It took them 1.5 hours to travel from the campsite to here. The three of them had actually run 80 miles in a single breath in the Black Forest, where it was difficult to move even an inch. The terrifying consumption of energy this brought was unbearable even for the mechanical girl who was made of iron. Silence, Gargamel said in a low voice. My black cat has already found traces of that forest demon. It's hiding in the cave. What are you going to do? Grim didn't dare to use his spiritual force to probe the cave for fear of alerting the forest demon. He couldn't help but ask in a low voice. I'll go in first. That damned fellow must have set up an ambush inside. But I fought it a few times, so I'm already familiar with its tricks. When we start fighting, you guys take the opportunity to rush in and attack from both sides. Capture it in one fell swoop. Remember to move quickly. Don't let it escape. Gargamel's suggestion caused Grim to be slightly stunned. Along the way, he had always been on guard against Gargamel, but he didn't expect the other party to propose such a battle plan that was completely for his sake. Gargamel had taken on all the dangers and left the safest position for himself. Could it be that he had wrongly accused him? Grim hesitated in his heart, but on the surface he calmly agreed. Gargamel quickly checked all the magic equipment on his body, then waved his hand and scattered a light blue powder. His entire body then disappeared into thin air. However, in Grim's elemental vision, his body was only a little blurry. He was stealthily sneaking into the pitch-black cave at the bottom of the cliff. "Let's get ready as well," Grim ordered in a low voice. He took out 3 strange stones with mysterious runes engraved on them. As his spiritual force seeped into them, they strangely floated up. It was as if there was an invisible orbit above Grim's head. The 3 stones were fixed in the air 10 centimeters above his head, and they slowly revolved around his head. Next, Grim took out a pitch-black magic staff that was more than 2 meters long. With a slight shake, the dark red crystal at the tip of the staff immediately released terrifying elemental fluctuations that could cause one's heart to tremble. At the same time, all sorts of magical defensive force fields and defensive spells started surging out of his body. Einstone, magic staff. Sabrina could not help but have a look of envy in her eyes. These were all high-grade items in the field of magic equipment. Even the most basic ones would easily cost 400 to 500 magic crystals. If they were of high quality, each of them would probably cost more than 1,000 magic crystals. For a quasi-wizard like her, having an instant magic wand that cost 100 to 200 magic crystals would already make her a millionaire among the apprentices. As for equipment that cost more than 1,000 magic crystals, it would always be an extravagant accessory that she could only dream of. Soon, as the two waited silently, a terrifying elemental explosion suddenly sounded from the depths of the pitch-black cave. The entire cliff began to tremble, and many scattered stones began to roll down. "Let's go in and have a look." Grim took the lead and rushed into the cave. What the two did not notice was that the moment they rushed into the cave, there were 2 inconspicuous stones on each side of the cave entrance that were faintly glowing with a blue halo. The cave was not big, and the ground was moist and soft. There was a fishy smell in the air, as if it was the lair of some forest beast. Grim glanced around and found a dark and deep tunnel at the corner of the cave. Waves of elemental waves were constantly surging inside. It seemed like the battle was very intense. Grim lightly tapped his magic staff, and the dark red crystal at the tip of the staff immediately burned like a torch. He led Sabrina into the tunnel without hesitation. The tunnel was not wide, and there was still water dripping from the top. However, the elemental particles in the air were unprecedentedly active, as if there was something special underground. The tunnel meandered downwards, and it seemed to lead straight into the thick belly of the mountain. The wind that blew against their faces was even more bone-chilling, and there was a hint of moldy smell in it. Another 2 violent tremors occurred, and dust continuously fell from the top of their heads. If it wasn't for the hood and the flame barrier, Grim would have been covered in soot by now. He rushed out of the tunnel and saw a huge natural cave in front of him. A thick stone pillar stood in front of him, blocking the violent elemental waves in the distance. Violent elemental explosions and hoarse shouts came from the other side of the cave. "Come quickly!" The voice was slightly hoarse, but Grim could tell that it was the Gargamel's old voice. "I've already injured it. Come quickly and stop it." The voice was very urgent, as if the battle was very urgent. Grim ran with large strides, and when he went around the stone pillar, he was shocked by the scene that appeared in front of him. A scrawny, stooped figure was standing alone in the center of the cave. 2 huge pale yellow light orbs were floating in front of him. Strange, loud elemental explosions and strong elemental shock waves were coming out of them. The sounds of battle and the elemental vibrations that Grim had sensed were all fake. Grim suddenly stopped in his tracks and waved his staff. The flame barrier that was hidden outside his body immediately appeared, and the dense fire elemental energy began to quickly gather around his body. Gargamel, what are you doing? Grim coldly stared at the thin figure. Could it be that this whole thing was a lie? Sabrina, who was lagging behind, stopped next to the stone pillar. She anxiously scanned every corner of the cave and began to slowly retreat. With her strength, she did not have the qualifications to interfere in a battle between magi. Regardless of whether this was a conspiracy or not, it was best for her to stay far away from it. Kakik, it's really not easy to wait for a single magus like you. It's not in vain that I've waited in Pine Tower Town for 5 years. Today, I finally have business. After saying this, Gargamel could not help but let out a cold laugh. His greedy eyes were constantly looking at the magic equipment on Grim's body. Hearing Gargamel's words, Grim's expression finally turned gloomy. Gargamel, who gave you the courage to ambush a magus of the same rank here? Let your companions come out. I don't believe that with your strength and courage, you would dare to do such a thing. Kakik, a clear and melodious voice suddenly sounded in the cave. Gargamel, this guy seems to be very familiar with you. He can even see through your cowardly character. As soon as the voice finished, a transparent figure appeared at the top of the cave. It was a completely transparent green humanoid with an exquisite figure and a curvaceous body. It was like a beautiful ghost made of green fluorescence. She was completely naked, but the dark magic runes and thorny flower petals that covered her body perfectly covered a few key parts of her body. Her hair was like a fluttering branch of a flower, and her hand were made of 4 to 5 thick vines intertwined together. Her beautiful legs were split into countless thorny roots at the end. At this moment, they were all dancing in the wind, emitting a faint green fluorescence. Forest demon. It was actually a forest demon. Chapter 396. Unexpected, truly unexpected. There was actually such a strange creature as a forest demon in this world. Grim clicked his tongue in admiration as he raised the destructive flame staff in his hand. Looks like this is part of your scheme. What? A shabby regular magus and an even shabbier magical creature want to keep me here. Aren't you a little too arrogant? With that, he waved his staff, and the tip of the staff spat out a huge flame that was tens of meters long, causing the temperature in the cave to rise. Oof, arrogant human. You're the one who's too arrogant. The forest demon floated down and laughed. Did you think we would dare to trick you into coming here without any preparations? I'll show you what I've set up. Following Lin Yao's soft shout, the ground, walls, ceiling, and stone pillars of the entire karst cave shone with a blue light, and a huge, strange spell formation that could cover the entire space emerged. At the same time that the spell formation appeared, the flames that Grim was spitting out from his staff and the flame barrier around him dimmed at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. With a pop sound, the flame barrier dissipated into fragments of fire that filled the sky. Beep. Unknown force field detected. Initial assessment is the AI. Chip's prompt in his mind caused Grim to pause for a moment, and he could not help but read out a name. Demon. Disturbance. Barrier. It's good that you know. The forest demon's dreamy and beautiful body slowly floated in the cave, even passing through a stone pillar and moving behind Grim, firmly blocking the only path. This is a demon disturbance barrier specially prepared for you. I've already adjusted it to a fire restriction barrier. In this cave, no fire-type spells can be successfully cast. How much strength do you, a fire magus, have left after losing your innate spells? Ha! Sabrina, who was holding onto the stone pillar, had an extremely ugly expression on her face. A single magus was already difficult enough to deal with, and now a magus and a magical creature were colluding. She had to be extremely unlucky to be able to put on such a show. Just as Sabrina was about to lose all hope, Grim continued to smile as he looked at the two enemies in front and behind him, a strange look in his eyes. Are you sure that a demon disruption formation can make me surrender? Since that's the case, what are you still hesitating for? Hurry up and capture me. Grim's calmness was clearly beyond Lin Yao's expectations. Her beautiful eyes looked past Grim and landed on Gargamel. "Don't worry. He's just pretending to be calm." Gargamel waved the staff in his hand. "This spell formation was jointly laid down by us. There won't be any problems." With that said, Gargamel casually summoned a fireball. A dense amount of fire elemental energy gathered in his palm, but before it could condense into a solid form, it dispersed into rolling waves of fire due to the interference of an inexplicable external force. "Then go and capture him," said the forest demon indifferently. "This?" Gargamel looked at his own thin body, then at Grim's burly body, and couldn't help but shiver. Melee combat was out of the question. Without any hesitation, Gargamel chose the move he was most proficient in. He quickly waved the staff in his hand, and every time he waved it, a strange halo would appear beside Grim's body. These halos contained different colored magic powders that floated into Grim's body along with the flow of magic power. Unfortunately, before they could enter Grim's body, they were suddenly burnt to ashes by the elemental flames that burst out of his body. "Damn it! Didn't you say that he can't use fire spells?" Seeing this, Lin Yao couldn't care less about her demeanor and angrily cursed. "Don't worry, this is not a spell." Gargamel was indeed a veteran magus who had lived for more than 200 years. With one look, he could see through Grim's situation. He has already turned his body into an elemental form. This is an innate ability of the body of fire, not a spell that can be released externally. That's why the demon disruption formation can't interfere with it. "Are you sure?" Lin Yao couldn't help but be suspicious. Although her strength was higher than Gargamel's, her knowledge of magic was far inferior to his. "Ahem, little girl, do you want to live or die?" Gargamel rolled his eyes and stared at Sabrina. He can't use any spells anymore. Right now, he's just a strong man with a slightly better physique. "If you help me take him down, I'll help you heal your internal injuries." Grim coldly snorted and turned around, walking towards Lin Yao, who was blocking his way. "Stop him, Sabrina, or I'll kill you right here." Gargamel screamed like a pig being slaughtered as he threw out 2 small reagent bottles and 2 summoning stones. The small reagent bottles shattered on the ground, and 2 storm elementals crawled out from the sticky and heavy liquid. 2 earth elementals also crawled out from where the summoning stones had disappeared. On the other side, Lin Yao also landed on the ground with a serious expression. Her legs turned into countless thorny vines that pierced into the soil below her. In the next second, the earth began to boil and the mud began to roll. Thick vines dug into the ground like giant snakes and quickly extended towards Grim. Sabrina, who was between Grim and Lin Yao, clenched her teeth and hesitated for a moment. Finally, she made up her mind. For the 5 3-meter-long mechanical tentacles extended from her body and attacked towards Lin Yao's roots. "Go deal with the summoned creatures behind me. Let me handle this forest demon." Grim finally gave Sabrina a serious look and gave the order. Sabrina turned around in surprise and saw Grim's calm gaze. She relaxed a little and immediately turned around to face the 4 summoned creatures. Each of them had the strength of a quasi-wizard, and with Gargamel's help, it would be very difficult for Sabrina to stop them. Grim took a step forward and coldly looked at the rapidly approaching Lin Yao. He raised his hand and threw out 2 magic puppet crystal cores. In the next second, the 2 wizard-level magic puppets, the rotting one and the roaring one, appeared in front of him. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, a muffled explosion resounded. As soon as the roarer appeared, its thick and solid stone legs stomped fiercely, and the rock straight beneath it immediately cracked like a spider web. A powerful shockwave also collided head-on with the rattan roots that the forest monsters extended towards them. Asterisk woo. Asterisk the Lin Yao let out a muffled groan, and the tentacles immediately retreated as if they were electrocuted. She could see with the naked eye that nearly half of the tentacles had already been broken and shattered. The dripping green liquid quickly gathered into a small stream at her feet. The Lin Yao angrily waved its left hand and split it into 4 vines, which smashed the acid arrow thrown by the rotting one. Haha, you're right. I'm a fire wizard. Grim chuckled. But your information is not comprehensive enough. Apart from being a fire wizard, I'm also a puppet summoner. Thanks to the 2 enemies, all fire sorcery had been banned here, but other sorcery lineages had not been banned. This was actually quite normal. If a wandering wizard could casually set up a field-disrupting enchantment, then a rune circle master would probably be the most powerful wizard in the world. After all, most wizards were only good at long-range attacks. Once they lost their ability to cast spells, they would have to fight monsters with their bodies, and they would definitely die a miserable death. This was the main reason why Gargamel and the Lin Yao had set up this trap. Relying on this field of disruption that could be adjusted in advance, they had killed 3 wandering wizards in the past 10 years. Each time, Gargamel would act as a spy and investigate the enemy's innate ability before luring them into the ground. Once the field of disruption was deployed, the elemental wizards would instantly lose 70% to 80% of their combat power. What little strength they had left was not enough to withstand the combined attacks of a wizard and a monster, which was why they had succeeded 3 times. But this time, they obviously did not succeed. They actually ran into Grim, who was an iron plate, and they deserved to bleed. The Lin Yao in front of them had the rare innate ability to make people fall asleep, and when it was suddenly used on Grim, he was really shocked. In the midst of the battle, the Lin Yao's body suddenly shot out a dark green halo of nature, sweeping across the battlefield at lightning speed. Whether it was the elemental bodies of the 2 magic puppets, the half-mechanical body of Sabrina, or the heavily protected Grim, all of them felt dizzy and sleepy the moment the green halo penetrated their bodies. They froze on the spot at the same time and fell into dreamland. "Quick!" the Lin Yao shouted at the top of his lungs. "That fire wizard's spiritual force is too strong. I can only freeze him for 5 seconds. Quick!" While roaring, the forest demon quickly pounced towards Grim, the thick and long rattan tentacles in its hands madly wrapping around him. On the other side, Gargamel gritted his teeth, grabbed a bottle of potion, and poured it into his stomach. Then, he also madly rushed towards Grim. At this moment, Grim had not completely fallen asleep. On one hand, it was because of the Einstones that Alice had given him. Not only did they increase his spiritual force, they also reduced some of the spirit control. After all, the innate spell that the Lin Yao had cast was also a type of spirit ability. Otherwise, he would not have been able to control the elemental magic puppets. On the other hand, the AI chip in Grim's mind detected that he was about to fall asleep and released a light electric current to stimulate his consciousness, allowing him to quickly wake up. However, even though he was awake, he still could not escape the pincer attack of Gargamel and the Lin Yao. Chip, is there a way to solve this? Beep. This field of disruption is a beginner-grade spell formation. The host only needs to transform into a Balrog, and the increase in his stats will be able to cancel out the elemental interference. Then what are you waiting for? Transform into a Balrog. Chapter 397. What did it feel like to witness a fire wizard transform into a terrifying fire demon in an instant from a place where he could touch it? No one knew this better than Sabrina. Just a moment ago, there was a young man standing beside her with a slightly sturdy body. But the next moment, raging flames gushed out of his body, as if there was a small tunnel connecting to the fire elemental plane hidden in his body. Violent and ferocious elemental flames gushed out of his eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and every pore of his body. The scorching flames forced Sabrina to take a few steps back, or else she would have been engulfed by the explosion of flames at close range. The crimson flames surged around his body, and under the control of a strong willpower, they transformed into a set of exquisite and oddly shaped flame armor. Beneath the flaming armor, raging flames churned and gathered, mixing with the black and red lava that was surging out, forming a terrifying and sinister body of lava. In the midst of the terrifying, roaring flames, Grimm's sturdy body kept expanding, and in the blink of an eye, it had more than doubled in size. A terrifying black and red lava hand wrapped in boundless raging flames, and terrifying streams of flames grabbed towards the howling forest demon that was pouncing over. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Cursing continuously, the forest monster fiercely pierced the rock stratum with the roots under its feet, desperately stopping the momentum of its body. At the same time, it waved its whistling rot-tan tentacles, entangling the magma hand like a wild snake. When the terrifying lava hand and rot-tan tentacles collided, a terrifying sizzling sound could be heard. Then, the forest spirit screamed and quickly retreated from the huge ball of fire. With just 2 or 3 fingers, the front half of her hands had already been burnt to a crisp. As she hurriedly retreated, black ashes scattered everywhere. The Gargamel that was pouncing from behind Grimm was blocked by the 4-meter-tall howler. After swallowing the violent poison potion, not only did Gargamel's body become immune to all poisons, even his casual attacks carried a terrifying poison. The poison was so strong that even elemental creatures could not resist it. Gargamel turned into a puff of black smoke and frantically circled around the roar. Every time the ghostly hands that were as black as chicken claws touched the thick rock armor of the roar, black claw marks would be left behind, and the stone powder would be corroded into black powder by the toxins. On the other hand, the rotting ones threw multiple acid bolts and toxic auras at Gargamel, but none of them were effective. Gargamel could only cooperate with the roaring ones to barely block them. Sabrina, who had been carefully dealing with the 4 summoned elemental creatures, was naturally overjoyed. She immediately cheered up and activated her mechanical tentacles and whirling blade array, successfully cutting the 2 earth elementals into pieces. However, the remaining 2 storm elementals were both at the level of quasi-magi, and they were not afraid of death. Their flying speed was so fast that it was hard for people to see them. Therefore, she could only try her best to hold them back and not let them disturb the battle between the wizards. Damn Gargamel, what kind of monster did you bring back for me? Lin Yao kept drifting around Gargamel, trying his best to avoid the long-range attacks of the flaming whip. Didn't you say he's just a normal wizard? How did his power of the will increase to this level? How did he break through the restriction of the rune circle? Gargamel raised his hand and shot out a black light, breaking through the acid bolts of the rotting ones. At the same time, he raised a black shield and blocked the fists of the roaring ones. The violent force sent him flying. If it wasn't for the violent poison potion that stimulated the basic stats of his body, he would have broken all his bones and tendons. Even so, Gargamel still vomited a mouthful of black blood, and his spirit became a little sluggish. Hold on for a little longer, Gargamel yelled. This is also a short-term aggressive spell. If we can hold on for a little longer, Gargamel, who had transformed into a tall flame demon, sneered. A human-like expression of disdain appeared on his face. You want to hold on until I can't hold on anymore? Ha ha ha! Gargamel laughed wildly. Then I'll show you my true form. Just now, Gargamel only borrowed the magic tattoo on his body. He didn't completely unseal the flame demon's heart. With the flame demon's heart beating once every 13 seconds, Gargamel could maintain the flame demon's transformation forever. However, in order to suppress the 2 wizards in the shortest time possible, Gargamel unsealed the flame demon's heart without hesitation and completed the second flame demon transformation. This time, the abyssal flame was no longer limited to a radius of 3 meters around Grimm. Instead, it was accompanied by the flame boundary that enveloped the entire underground karst cave. This underground cave was specially set up by Gargamel and Lin Yao to trap wizards who were alone, so the space inside was not too big. Therefore, Gargamel's flame barrier had a radius of 120 meters, and everyone was trapped in it in a flash. Gargamel's previously violent and poisonous body was instantly wrapped up by the raging flames in the air. The terrifyingly high temperature and terrifying flames blew on his body, immediately igniting his robe. This also meant that the defensive spell he had erected was unable to completely isolate the flames from the outside world. The huge cave was immediately engulfed by the sea of flames. Even the forest spirit could only put up a green barrier and frantically tried to escape. As for the two remaining storm elementals, they did not even last 5 seconds in the sea of flames. They screamed and turned into a liquid electric liquid, then burned into ashes. Sabrina's face was pale as she curled up into a ball. The flames surrounded her body, forming a gorgeous flame cage. However, the strange thing was that these flames seemed to be able to distinguish between friend and foe. The violent stream of flames actually split into two in front of her, only circling around the flame cage, not harming her in the slightest. Grim stood in the sea of fire like a great god strolling in his own divine kingdom. The omnipresent flames were his eyes, and the omnipresent sea of fire was his body. Sensing that the forest spirit was about to escape from the cave, Gargamel's body only trembled slightly, and he had already teleported to the exit of the cave. Being continuously burned by the sea of flames that was as strong as 100 degrees Celsius, be it the souls fused with Lin Yao's body or the force of nature, none of them could resist such a powerful flame attack. However, just as she was about to rush out of the sea of flames, an indomitable, huge body of flames suddenly appeared in front of her. The terrifying giant lava hand, wrapped in flames and heat waves, once again grabbed towards her neck. Just as the forest spirit wanted to escape again, she suddenly felt her body tighten. Strange flame chains extended from the sea of flames below her and tightly wrapped around her transparent body. Just as she tried to break free, the giant lava hand had already tightly wrapped around her upper body. As soon as the black-red lava hand touched the forest spirit's body, a terrifying sizzling sound was heard, and thick black smoke and burnt smell were emitted from her body. This was no less than a terrifying trial by fire. After all, the forest spirit was only a semi-incorporeal monster. Her weak strength was unable to break free from Gargamel's shackles, and her transparent body almost evaporated in the blink of an eye. This caused her to howl in pain, but there was nothing she could do. Let her go. The sea of flames parted, and Gargamel came out with a black face. The black smoke that continuously flowed out of his body instantly annihilated the sea of flames within 10 meters of him. He took the opportunity to raise the captive in his hand and shouted at Gargamel, "If you let Ava go, I'll let this apprentice go." In Gargamel's ghost hand, Sabrina's tentacles were hanging limply, and her face was covered in black smoke. It was obvious that she had been poisoned. "You want to use an apprentice to exchange for the forest spirit in my hand?" Gargamel smiled coldly and tightened his grip. The forest spirit immediately screamed in pain again. Seeing that his threat was ineffective, Gargamel's sinister face was filled with malevolence. He reached out and grabbed the black cat out of the void. No. The black cat seemed to know what Gargamel wanted to do and struggled frantically to escape. Unfortunately, as Gargamel's companion beast, it was completely under his control. Felix, Barter, with a quick incantation, a black light flashed in Gargamel's hand, and the black cat disappeared in an instant, replaced by the pitiful forest spirit. The forest spirit that was originally imprisoned in Gargamel's hand had been replaced by the black cat that had suddenly appeared. Gargamel was slightly startled, and he suddenly closed his hand. The black cat that was about to turn incorporeal and escape immediately let out a miserable shriek. Its small head was pinched by the lava hand, and with a light squeeze, the terrifying sound of a skull cracking could be heard. "Wait!" The forest spirit that had just escaped screamed loudly behind Gargamel. Gargamel's large hand was filled with fire runes that circled around the black cat's body, completely sealing off any possibility of escape. After everything was done, Gargamel turned his head to look at the two people 20 meters away. "Can you not kill the black cat?" The two of us can sign a contract with you and serve you in exchange for the black cat. What do you think?" The forest spirit stammered in fear. "No, Ava, don't worry about me. Hurry up and leave. You can turn incorporeal and escape from here. Hurry up and leave." Gargamel, the thin and withered old man, was actually acting like a gangster at this moment. The expression he had when he looked at the forest spirit was actually filled with deep love. "No, the black cat is too important to you," the forest spirit angrily argued. "You've sacrificed too much to obtain it. Once it dies, you'll become a madman. Don't tell me you want to leave me and our child behind." Gargamel was dumbfounded. If it wasn't for the tense confrontation, he would have moved a small stool over to watch the love of the witch and demon. Especially when the forest spirit mentioned the child, Gargamel was even more shocked, as if he had been struck by lightning. He was about to go half crazy. Chapter 398. With the help of the AI, Chip's holographic vision, Grim could vaguely sense the abnormality in the forest demon's abdomen. In the battle just now, the forest demon had indeed appeared weak and timid. Grim had originally thought that this was her nature, but now he knew that she was trying to protect the fetus in her womb and did not dare to be as forceful as she usually was. Looking at the black cat in his hands, then at the furious forest demon and the despondent Gargamel, Grim could not make up his mind. Should he kill them all, or use the black cat to force them to serve him for a period of time? After hesitating for a moment, Grim made up his mind. "Serve me for 30 years, and I'll let you go." The forest demon's eyes lit up, and she was about to agree, but Gargamel stopped her. "How can we trust that you won't go back on your word?" As a magus, Gargamel was well aware of the greed and treachery of other magi. Even he himself was such a person. "We can sign a fair and reasonable service contract. With the restrictions of the contract, you should believe us, right?" Grim smiled coldly. "You'd better make up your mind quickly. If I find out that you're trying to stall for time..." Haha. Gargamel's heart sank when he heard the threat, but he still insisted. "We can serve you for 30 years, but you can't have any ideas about our child." Hiding behind Gargamel, the forest demon Ava had only just considered this problem and immediately stared at Grim with a face full of fear. Grim smacked his lips in regret. In truth, he was quite curious about a little life born from a magus and a magical creature. However, for the sake of a long-term future, Grim could only reluctantly part with it. Grim did not intend to stay in the Salubo family forever. When the time was right, he would raise his own banner and leave the Salubo family. In order to achieve this, he needed to have a group of subordinates that would listen to his orders. It was for this vague ideal that Grim had tried his best to befriend Mary and Alice in order to pull them into his camp. Although Meryl showed signs of leaning towards him, she was still a magus of the Salubo family. Once he left the family, it was unknown whether she would still be willing to follow him. After all, one side was a middle-ranked sorcerer family with some reputation in the scattered Talon region, while the other side was a fledgling family with 2 or 3 small soldiers. Comparing the two, it was obvious which side could provide her with more resources and more power. Therefore, Grim did not have the confidence to drag Meryl away. Grim wasn't even confident that he could pull Mary, who was in another world, into his camp. To be honest, the only one who was willing to join Grim's faction was Alice, who was far away in the north. Based on this analysis, Grim's faction was still too weak. If Gargamel and Forest Demon could join them, even if they were half-hearted, they would still be of great help to Grim's future plans. With this in mind, Grim could only regretfully give up on that little life. Grim held the black cat in one hand and drew a line in the air with the other. It did not take him much effort to draw up a fair, just and open sorcery contract. Apart from specifying the rights, obligations, and responsibilities of both parties, there were no discriminatory or oppressive terms. It was so relaxed that it was similar to a contract between equal partners. This undoubtedly caused Gargamel and Ava to look at each other in dismay, not daring to believe their eyes. After studying the contract for a long time and confirming that there were no deceptive methods or hidden terms, and that there were no misleading language traps. Gargamel and Ava reluctantly merged their soul imprints into it. After the contract was established, the words written with flame runes slowly dissipated into the air. The three of them could vaguely feel the subtle changes in their souls. There was no god of contracts in the Magus world, and Magi would not pledge their loyalty to any god. Therefore, the witnesses of most contracts were the great and just world will. As long as it was in the Magus world, anyone who violated a contract was bound to be spurned and devoured by the world will. This was a punishment that no Magus would be willing to bear. Grimm opened his hand and released the black cat's shackles. His entire body also began to shrink under the violent tremors of the fire elements. Since they were no longer enemies, there was no need to maintain the flame demon form. After all, the fire energy spewed out from the flame demon's heart was a heavy burden to Grimm's body. The moment the black cat broke free from its shackles, it flashed to Gargamel's feet and dove into the shadows, never to show itself again. Gargamel hesitated for a moment, and an awkward expression appeared on his gloomy face. He bowed and said in a low voice, "Master, why have you come to the Black Forest this time?" The forest demon AI, while also revealed a curious expression. To be honest, someone like Grimm who had the strength of an elite magus when he went berserk did not look like someone who would need to go out and search for materials. Therefore, the two of them could not help but be curious about Grimm's goal. Due to the contract, Grimm's trust in them far exceeded that of anyone else. Thus, when faced with Gargamel's questions, he did not hide it anymore. I've used some covert methods to find out that there is an underground volcano in the Black Forest that can be used. The approximate location is... Do you have any clues about this? Gargamel did not have any clues, so the two of them could only turn to look at the forest demon Ava. She was a forest monster that had wandered the Black Forest for 100 years. Thus, she was familiar with the situation everywhere. Asking her for directions was undoubtedly the most appropriate thing to do. As expected, the forest demon Ava immediately revealed a pondering and hesitant expression. The coordinates you mentioned are vaguely familiar to me. There seems to be a family of manticores there, and there are about 11 of them. 7 of the adult manticores have the strength of a magus, and the 4 younger ones have the strength of a quasi-magus. Manticores? Grimm was stunned for a moment. With a thought, the information stored in the AI chip's database was extracted. Manticores, flying creatures, were terrifying monsters that combined the characteristics of bats, lions, and scorpions. They had the head of a lion, the tail of a scorpion for legs, and bat wings. They usually fought like a lion, and the bat wings on their back allowed them to glide at low altitudes and fly short distances. However, their most terrifying weapon of attack was the scorpion tail on their back. The venom on the manticore's claws and teeth had fatal lethality, but the scorpion tail on their back also had a terrifying paralyzing effect. The antidotes concocted by Magi could be used to resist the venom, but they were completely useless against the paralyzing effect. Thus, once a magus was surrounded by the manticores, it was very likely that they would be paralyzed and would not even have the chance to resist before they were torn to pieces. However, the poison and paralyzing effects of the manticores were ineffective against the magic puppets, which was a great piece of good news. When Grimm slowly shared some of the information he knew about the manticores, the forest demon Ava's face revealed a look of envy. The reason why human magi were so powerful could be clearly seen from this. The forest demon Ava's understanding of the manticores relied on bloody battles. Any direct experience could only be obtained after paying a painful price. Human magi, on the other hand, relied on the knowledge passed down from generation to generation. As long as she mentioned a name, they would be able to quickly dig out useful information from the knowledge system. Even if they had not yet come into contact with the manticores, they would be able to formulate a response plan in advance and prepare sufficient means. With this kind of preparation, as long as there were not too many accidents, it was very easy for them to gain the upper hand in contact with the monsters. In many cases, the quantity and quality of the monsters were far higher than that of human magi, but they could only become hunting targets at will. Perhaps this was the main reason. Grimm was not in the mood to slowly understand the feelings of the forest demon Ava at this moment. Instead, he could not help but ask about the terrain near the manticore's lair. After listening to Ava's answer, he was already 70 to 80% sure that it was the entrance to the underground volcano he was looking for. However, this was a serious matter, and as for whether it was the entrance or not, he would need to personally go there to determine. After everything was discussed, Grimm let Gargamel remove the poison from Sabrina's body and woke her up from her coma. In order to avoid exposing the relationship between the two sides, the forest demon Ava avoided in advance, while Gargamel stood behind Grimm meekly. When she woke up, the two sides had already shaken hands and made peace, and the monster was nowhere to be found. Although Sabrina knew that there must be something fishy going on, she could only bury it deep in her heart and did not dare to ask anything. Matters between magi were not something that a prospective magus like her could participate in. The more she knew, the greater the danger, so Sabrina wisely chose to remain silent. Near dawn, the three of them returned to the camp without a hitch. Compared to Grimm, who was unscathed, Gargamel and Sabrina looked quite haggard, and even had to pull up their hoods to cover the burn marks on their faces. Seeing that they had returned safely, the rest of the people were quite happy. Only the potioneering apprentice called Anthony had a trace of surprise in his eyes that could not be concealed. He was a disciple of Wizard Gargamel, and obviously knew part of his teacher's plan in advance. Now that he saw the three of them return together, he was naturally surprised and looked a little flustered. However, Grimm was too lazy to care about such insignificant people, and naturally left everything to Gargamel to settle. Chapter 399. With a clear master-follower relationship, Gargamel was no longer as lazy as before. With his special ability as a potion maker, small monsters would immediately hide as far away as they could the moment they smelled the herbs hanging on his staff. This also allowed the exploration team to avoid many unnecessary battles. However, Gargamel's potions were obviously only effective on monsters and had no effect on normal forest beasts. This was the time to show the value of these mercenaries. Lowy, Jillian, and Neil, who was a half-baked hunter, could deal with normal beasts. If they were attacked by a large group of beasts, Sabrina's terrifying combat power would be completely unleashed. No matter how terrifying the beasts were, they were nothing more than pieces of rotten meat that could be slaughtered and eaten at will. If it weren't for the fact that she didn't want to disturb the powerful monsters, Sabrina could even slaughter the entire pack of 200 wolves by herself without getting hurt. Sabrina, who had the protection of witchcraft, was already a godlike existence in the eyes of adventurers. However, in front of the two wizards, she often did not even dare to breathe, obediently obeying their orders. Even the skinny Gargamel, who seemed like he could be blown away by a gust of wind, was arrogant and unscrupulous when commanding the mechanical girl. With the full cooperation of the wizard Gargamel, the team's speed naturally increased by countless times. It only took them 3 days to arrive near their destination under the lead of Luo Wei and the others. Since it was their first time here, the team did not act rashly. They set up a camp near a hidden canyon. Sword and shield warrior Loa led Grimm and Gargamel up a small slope. Through the gaps between the dense trees, they peeked at the mysterious area half a mile away. Sick Forest. This was also the name that the locals gave the black forest that covered an area of 50 miles. The only reason why it was given such a title was that the trees here seemed to have contracted a strange disease. All the leaves were yellow and withered, looking sickly. Seriously speaking, the sick forest was actually a small hill. The highest point was no more than 200 meters. The top of the hill was smooth and flat without any steep peaks. The entire mountain was covered with bony ancient trees. The leaves were half yellow and half green, looking rather strange. The ancient trees on the hill were not very tall. Large chunks of metal rocks were exposed from time to time under the thin layer of soil, reflecting the light of the sun. The roots of the ancient tree extended through the soil and rocks with difficulty, and many places were already exposed outside the soil. The soil on the hill was grayish-brown with a hint of burnt yellow. It was as if an infinite heat was slowly seeping out from the ground, turning this place into a small oven. The ancient trees on the hill were like half-baked cheese. If it wasn't for the intermittent heat that gave them the opportunity to survive, the entire hill would have become a barren land. Grim and Gargamel looked at each other and silently nodded. From the shape of the sick forest, it could be seen that there was indeed a source of heat underground. If they wanted to figure out the cause of the heat, they could only take the risk and go down to investigate. There's a hole there and there. They're both very narrow and short, and can only fit an adult bending over to walk through. In that direction, there's a slightly larger cave entrance, but it's filled with terrifying bats. It's difficult for outsiders to enter without alerting them. Lowy was indeed an adventurer who made a living here all year round. He was extremely familiar with a dangerous place like the sickly forest. However, it was obvious that his understanding was limited to the surface of the sick forest. As for the world below the hill, it was not something he could come into contact with. Fortunately, Grim had already obtained some information from the forest demons. Otherwise, he would have no choice but to bite the bullet and go down. Even with Grim's confidence, if he were to run into a group of manticores blindly, he would at least be covered in dust. If he did not pay a price, even with his strength, he would lose a layer of skin, even if he did not die. At this point, the adventurers' party had actually completed Grim's mission. As for exploring the underground world, this was not a mission that ordinary adventurers could complete. Even if Grim offered a bounty of magic crystals, Lowy would not be so foolish as to lead his party into a nest of monsters. Although magic crystals were good, one had to be alive to spend them. Grim did not insist on this, and only asked them to maintain the temporary camp on the surface. The real members of the expedition were still Grim, Gargamel, and Sabrina. In the evening, the sky darkened again, and the people gathered in the camp suddenly heard a strange sound. A large number of nocturnal bats swarmed out of a huge karst cave at the foot of the sick forest. There were so many of them that they covered the nearby sky. They circled around in the sky, and when there were enough of them, they suddenly pounced towards the forest in the distance like a dark cloud. These nocturnal creatures had finally moved out. Not long after the nocturnal bats moved out, the karst cave that had just quietened down suddenly heard a loud sound of wind breaking. Following a series of strange roars, terrifying manticores that were as large as rhinoceroses flew out of the karst cave. They glided in the sky and landed on a towering stone pillar near the entrance of the cave. They had a majestic body and head like a lion, and their fur was brown. They had a pair of leather-like dark red bat wings on their backs, and there was a terrifying, segmented scorpion tail behind their tails. The stinger of the scorpion tail was raised high, and the end of the stinger flashed with a strange blue luster. It was obvious that it was not an ordinary poison. Compared to the huge body of the manticore, the bat wings on its back seemed too thin and thin. Such a size obviously could not carry them high into the sky, nor could they fly at high speed, but the manticore did not care at all. After all, the manticore was a rare monster that lived in the underground world all year round. The area was narrow and the terrain was rugged. If the wings were too big, it would be difficult to spread them. Therefore, it only needed to glide at a low altitude with the help of its bat wings so that it could swoop down on its prey. 1, 2, 3 for 9. Grim and the other two hid in a crevice between the rocks, using medicinal powder to get rid of the smell on their bodies and observe the movement of the manticores from a close distance. There were a total of 9 manticores, some big and some small, but all of them were mature and young enough to be hunters. This also indicated that there were still 2 young manticores guarding the manticore's nest below the karst cave. After a moment of quarreling and confusion, the 9-headed manticores split into 3 groups, roaring as they rushed in different directions. Although they were underground creatures, food was too scarce in the underground world, so they had to come up to the surface every once in a while to satisfy the new manticore's thirst for blood. Let's go. Let's go meet those two young manticores. When the manticores had completely disappeared into the darkness of the night, Grim waved his hand and led the other two towards the entrance of the huge karst cave. As soon as they set off, they could see that Sabrina, who was a coolie, was carrying a huge cloth bag on her back. The bag was wriggling as if it was some kind of living creature. As soon as they entered the karst cave, a strong, suffocating stench assaulted their nostrils. Tens of thousands of bats lived here, causing the air in the cave to be extremely polluted. The floor and the stone pillars were also covered with a thick layer of bat droppings, so there was no place for people to step on. Grim stood at the entrance of the cave, his eyes slowly swept across the pitch-black space inside, and quickly locked onto an area. Damp and cold air blew out from there. Behind the jagged stalagmites, there must be a hidden passage leading to the lower level. With Grim's elemental vision, infrared detection, low-light vision, and long-range touch alternated, and with the help of a wizard's spiritual perception, the darkness in the karst cave quickly retreated and peeled away. Stalagmites, as sharp as wolf fangs, stone pillars that reached the top of the cave, and hidden cracks in the rocks. All of these slowly appeared in Grim's mind with him at the center. Multi-dimensional construction. As Grim's strength gradually increased, his visual perception ability was strengthened step by step. In the past, Grim could only see objects in a straight line of sight, and he could not see things hidden behind walls or stone pillars. But now, with the improvement of his ability and spiritual perception, his vision could even bypass obstacles and see what he wanted to see. Of course, the premise was that there were no energy disturbances or the walls were not too thick. The birth of this ability also meant that there would be no blind spots in his future battles. No matter where the enemy attacked him from, he could react immediately, attack, defend, or dodge. Every time, he could see the bigger picture and make a response that was more beneficial to him. "Come closer, I'll bring you guys in," Grim whispered. When Gargamel and Sabrina came closer, he reached out and grabbed their arms. His body slightly trembled, and in a sudden burst of fire, he disappeared on the spot. In the next second, in a dark corner of the karst cave where the bats did not dare to approach, Grim and the other two appeared in a flash of fire. It did not matter to Gargamel. With his powerful spiritual power, he endured the dizziness caused by the sudden change in space. As for Sabrina, as a prospective wizard apprentice, it was her first time experiencing a strange spell like flame teleportation. In an instant, she felt her throat was dry, and the scene in front of her was chaotic. She staggered 2 steps and held on to a stone pillar to catch her breath. "Let's go. There are 2 babies waiting for us inside." Chapter 400. This was a small cave that was 120 meters underground. There was an opening at each end of the cave that led to different areas of the underground world. The stone walls on both sides reflected a faint cold light under the fluorescent moss. Water droplets constantly dripped from the top of the cave, hitting the cold ground and making a monotonous pitter-patter sound. Although the sound was unceasing, the dark and deep underground world was still dominated by silence and deathly stillness. If one wanted to survive in this dark world, maintaining silence and avoiding body heat was the only way to survive. However, this rule had been broken today. A horned goat that had never appeared on the surface was tied to a rock in the middle of the cave by a metal chain. The dark and cold environment made it shiver in fear, and the huge wound on its hind leg was still slowly bleeding. The thick and pungent smell of blood had already filled the tunnel. Bah! The trembling cry of the horned goat spread far and wide in this deathly, silent world. The horned goat whimpered in annoyance and continuously used the horns on its head to hit the stone pillar that was tied to it. Only when it sensed the movement behind it did it turn around in fear. In the darkness, a terrifying figure crawling on the ground was slowly approaching it. This was a petrifying lizard. The 5-meter-long body made the petrifying lizard the undisputed largest monster in this area, and its guillotine-like fangs made it difficult for the creatures it bit to survive. Coupled with the petrification ray that only had a range of 3 meters, the petrifying lizard had become the well-deserved underground scavenger of the underground world. Looking at the pair of shining yellow eyes in the darkness that kept approaching, the horned goat was so frightened that it could not control itself. It desperately jumped and kicked. However, this did not help at all. Instead, it made the smell of blood on its body spread faster and more widely. Just as the petrifying lizard approached the rock where the horned goat was, it was immediately blocked by a strange array that emerged from the ground. The petrifying lizard fiercely bit a few times and attacked the array several times, but it still could not do anything. The petrifying lizard was helpless. Suddenly, it half straightened its body and raised its nose to sniff the slowly flowing air in the cave. With the sensitivity of an underground creature, it smelled a familiar and terrifying smell from the thick smell of blood. Without hesitation, the petrified lizard turned around and crawled into the darkness, quickly disappearing. Not long after the petrified lizard disappeared, a strong gust of wind suddenly blew in the cave. Then, a strong black figure rushed out from the tunnel and coiled around the hanging stalactites at the top of the cave. In the end, this black shadow landed on a protruding platform on the rock wall. It sat majestically at the top and silently looked down at everything in the cave below. Shocked by the strange atmosphere, the horned sheep was paralyzed on the ground, and there was an unpleasant smell of urine coming from under its body. Although the cave was dark, the huge black shadow could already see every corner of this space with the help of glimmer vision. The cold floor, the dark stone walls, the gurgling underground river. Everything was under its control. The black shadow stood quietly in the darkness. Its green eyes had a tinge of earthy yellow, and it was filled with doubt and uneasiness. However, as an underage manticore, it was obviously not mature enough. All of the scent emitted by the horned goat was sucked into its nostrils. The unique and delicious scent of flesh and blood of the creature at the bottom stimulated its blood vessels. Saliva dripped down from its mouth, corroding a small hole on the rock platform beneath it. The scene in front of it looked like an ugly trap, but where was the enemy that set this trap? The little manticore resisted the urge to dive down and feast on the horned sheep. It opened its eyes wide and looked around for possible enemies. However, even if it scanned every corner of the cave, it did not find any traces of outsiders. Finally, the little manticore could no longer hold back its natural hunger for flesh and blood. With a soft roar, it dived down and fiercely pounced on the horned sheep. After a while, the strange sound of the little manticore crazily devouring the horned sheep's flesh could be heard in the cave. As a ferocious underground creature, the little manticore never cared about table etiquette. The scene of it crazily eating was unbearable. The whole rock was dripping with blood, and it looked like a small slaughterhouse. Just as the little manticore fell into a frenzy of eating, a shallow pool in the corner of the cave rippled, and 3 human figures slowly emerged. Fall, fall, fall. Gargamel could not help but murmur through the thick darkness. Following his murmur, the little manticore that was gorging itself suddenly swayed. Its wide bat wings had just spread open, and before it could even take flight, its huge body strangely fell to the ground. "Hurry up," Grim whispered. "There's another little manticore nearby. We don't have that much time." "Understood." Gargamel laughed evilly. "It won't take much time to extract a little of the poison from its tail. I promise it won't notice anything afterwards." After saying this, he took advantage of the darkness and quietly crept towards the sleeping little manticore. There were still 2 hours before dawn, and the adult manticores that were scattered in the nearby forest had also returned to the entrance of the cave. It was obvious that their bellies were bulging, and they had completely eaten their fill. Their thick hind legs were still holding onto bloody prey. After resting on the stone pillars for a while, They roared and went back into the cave. Only when they completely disappeared into the underground tunnel did the nocturnal bats dare to flap their wings and return to their nest. Grim and the other two watched the whole process from the side, and when the sky brightened again, they returned to the camp with satisfaction. During their first exploration of the underground nest, they did not kill any living creatures, nor did they capture the little manticore that fell into their trap. They only secretly extracted some of its flesh and poison. When the anesthetic wore off, the little manticore woke up from its deep sleep, and all the abnormalities around it had been completely erased by Grim and the others. After all, the little manticore's intelligence was not perfect, and under the influence of the anesthetic, it had forgotten most of the things that happened before and could only return to its nest suspiciously. With Gargamel, the pharmacist, and the poison extracted from the little manticore's body, it was possible to concoct some anti-paralysis medicine. Although it was impossible to completely resist the paralysis attack of an adult manticore, it was much better than using its body to resist. For several days, Grim and Gargamel slept during the day and came out at night, spending almost every night in the winding underground tunnel. They observed the manticore's behavior and living habits from a close distance, and even sneaked into the nest to familiarize themselves with the terrain, laying a solid foundation for the cleanup mission later on. After careful planning and deliberation, Grim finally came up with a perfect plan to eliminate the manticores, and the execution time was set for the 7th day after they arrived at the sick forest. According to Grim's observation, this day should also be the day when the adult and young manticores of the manticore family would leave their nest for a large-scale hunt, which was the perfect time to carry out the plan. And the executors of the plan were all the members of the adventurer team. Under the temptation of Grim's reward of 300 magic crystals, Loey and the others finally gave in. It was another beautiful night with a bright moon and sparse stars. The sky had just turned dark when a large number of bats came out of the cave again. They gathered into a cloud in the night sky around the sick forest, circled around a few times, and then dispersed into the nearby forest. The 9-headed manticore also appeared again, but after a brief division of labor, they went their separate ways. When they were far away, Grim and the rest of the group of 8 revealed themselves and went straight into the depths of the cave, letting Sabrina and the others follow behind. Grim and Gargamel rushed into the underground tunnel and headed straight for the manticore's lair. Time was very precious, and they had to make every second count. They had to set up a trap before the manticores realized that something was wrong, or else they would be easily trapped in the nest by the returning manticores. If they wanted to lure the manticores into the nest, they had to control the 2 young manticores that were guarding the nest. That was why Grim and Gargamel were a step ahead, and with the help of witchcraft, they quickly pushed into the manticore's nest. Unlike last time when they were sneaking around, this time they were practically beating drums and gongs as they rushed into the underground tunnel. While going down the tunnel, Grim continuously threw out witchcraft fireballs, blowing up the small underground creatures that were hiding in the dark into pieces. The huge fireball rumbled and spread rapidly in the underground tunnel. They didn't even need to search for it. The 2 little manticores that were hiding in the dark rushed out after the sound of the explosion. The young manticores were only at the level of a quasi-wizard. Although their combat power was not worth mentioning in Grim's eyes, it still took a lot of effort to capture them. Grim took the lead and rushed into a small cave. There were 4 to 5 underground tunnels that led to different areas, and it could be considered as a small hub of this underground maze. As soon as Grim entered the cave, he felt a strong gust of wind above his head. 2 huge shadows the size of hills swooped down from the top of the cave. They opened their mouths and bit at Grim's head and shoulders with their white fangs. With regards to the ambush of the 2 little manticores, Grim had already learned about it through the latest multidimensional scenery construction. Therefore, Grim's figure only paused for a moment before he successfully used Flame Leap to jump to another area. At his original position, a huge lava fireball that he had prepared beforehand exploded at the perfect time, If Grimm wanted to kill the two young manticores, he only needed a solid lava fireball to make them lose a layer of skin, even if they did not die. However, in order to capture them alive, he had to explode the fireball in advance. Therefore, in an earth-shattering explosion and shockwave, the two young manticores were dizzy from the explosion. They were covered in wounds and could only scream in pain as they rushed out of the fire. What welcomed them was the Roar's iron fist that was as big as a clay pot. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.